somewhat lighthearted video about the creepiest children's drawings. I made jokes about a lot of them, but a few on that list did seem like they might have had some sinister backstories. I made jokes about a lot of them, but a few on that list did seem like they might have had some sinister children's drawings. I made jokes about a lot of them, but a few on that list did. This was a drawing made by a 6-year-old boy in 2012. The picture was found in his room by his older sister Tracy, who sent this to me, who was 14 at the time, and she showed it to her parents. In the picture is the family around the dinner table, drawn in a typical 6-year-old skill level. The reason Tracy showed it to her family is because she could recognize all the family members at the dinner table, even the family dog and cat. Who she couldn't recognize was the man sitting on the floor kind of behind the table. Tracy said in her emails to me that when she was asking her little brother who that man was, he kept shrugging his shoulders and saying he's not allowed to tell. The man was drawn to be dressed in all black and has reddish-brown curly hair, as you can see. Because of her little brother's refusal to explain who that fifth person in the picture was, she showed it to her parents, explaining that he likely had an imaginary friend or was pretending to be seeing ghosts. After the parents confronted the child at dinner asking who the man in the picture was, the boy made a pouty face and shrugged his shoulders. He did this anytime they asked, with the most detailed answer from his mouth being, "I'm not allowed to tell." The parents, specifically the dad, weren't fazed by it, as really a 6-year-old could draw anything and create some kind of crazy story in their head behind it. Tracy would be responsible for watching her brother often when their parents weren't home. And one day when she was left in charge of watching him, she heard her brother talking to someone in his room. Upon getting to his room, she learned he was just playing with his toy car set on the floor, talking to most likely himself as he played. Tracy asked if he was talking to anyone. He looked at her and shrugged his shoulders again, pouting his face. Tracy then noticed some candies on the floor of her brother's room, a specific kind of green apple flavored candy that she'd never seen her mother buy before. She asked him where he got this, and he ignored her, going back to playing. Tracy took the candies, and that angered her brother, yelling, "Give them back." She waited until her parents returned home to ask if either of them had bought the unusual candy. Since the boy was only 6 and it was summer break, aka receiving the candies at school wasn't even a possibility, random candies appearing in the boy's room became a concern. Even as the boy was scolded and pressed by his parents as to where he got the candies from, he still just made his pouty, angry face and ignored them. The boy was grounded by his father until he would answer the question, so he wasn't allowed to leave his room. The family checked the closets in his room, under the bed, even the closets outside of the room. The idea that someone was inside of the house was out the window. On that same night that he was grounded, Tracy sat close to her bedroom door instead of on her bed, so that she would easily hear if and when her brother in the next room would start talking. And sure enough, when he did, which to note was way past her brother's bedtime, she jumped up and ran to his room, opened the door, and saw her little 6-year-old brother standing at his open window talking to a man who looked as though he were about to climb into the room. Tracy screamed for her mom and dad, causing the man at the window to flee, and her brother began to cry. Once Tracy told her parents that a man was talking to her brother through his window, the police were called. The boy still refused to talk at first, but with the police there, he eventually said that his friend told him not to tell anyone about him, or that he couldn't come and play anymore. When asked his friend's name and age, he said he didn't know. When asked what the two of them would do, the boy said he would come with snacks and candies for him and just play with toys. When asked how they met, he said they met in front of the house one day when the man stopped on his bike and gave him some candy. After offering to come back with more candies and snacks, Tracy's brother told him which bedroom window was his, and that's when this started. Submitted to me all the way back in 2015, this was sent by a mother of 2 children, a 6-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. Almost every night between the hours of 12 and 5 a.m., the boy would come to the parents' bedroom crying that he's scared because someone or something was in his room at the edge of his bed. The boy would claim that every night the person or thing would come out from his closet and move to the same spot at the foot of his bed and just stand there not moving. The first few times the parents would check the boy's bedroom just to make him feel better. The closet door would always be opened. When questioned why the closet door was always open when it was supposed to be shut, he would claim that it was because he was telling the truth about the thing in his closet. Every time the parents would show their son that the closet was empty, he would go back to sleep. Their 8-year-old daughter never had any similar issues to this. For a few nights, the parents would let him start sleeping in their room on the floor with a blanket. Eventually though, after this had been going on for too long, the parents decided to humor him one more time and asked him to draw what the thing at the foot of his bed looked like. His drawing sent chills down his parents' spines. In the drawing was some grudge-like figure that seems like it would be enough to give a grown man nightmares, let alone a 6-year-old boy. There also appears to be something at the window, and when questioned about this, the boy said that he sees it at the window sometimes too when it's not at the foot of his bed. The parents' solution to this was moving their son's bed to the spare bedroom across the hall that didn't have any big closets. The mom who submitted this couldn't help but get a little creeped out herself at the drawing, and every time he would come crying to their room in the middle of the night. This third and last one is a little different in that it's a mix of drawings and writing, and there's 3 different pages of it. This was found by the new babysitter of an 11-year-old boy named Rocco in Ottawa, Canada. The babysitter, who I'll refer to as Alyssa, was needed while the parents of Rocco were away for a week. According to Alyssa, Rocco was very quiet and kept to himself most of the time. He would stay in his room for a majority of the day, and would only come out to get food from the fridge or to go downstairs to play video games. Alyssa tried to befriend the child the first day, but eventually gave up after realizing Rocco either didn't like her or was just a very unfriendly, creepy kid in general. Alyssa would spend the majority of her shifts doing schoolwork and watching movies. She knew Rocco had an obsession with guns because of the amount of toy guns he had. They would lay across the house in varying rooms, ranging from Nerf guns to airsoft guns to varying types of toy guns. Alyssa had never been in Rocco's room yet though, but one night when Alyssa was having trouble sleeping, she heard Rocco sneak into her designated bedroom and was just standing by the doorway. She sat up in her bed and asked Rocco if something wrong. Then she just closed the door quickly and she heard him running back to his room. The next day, Alyssa went into Rocco's room for the first time. Rocco wasn't in there and the light was off. This meant he was in the basement playing video games, as those were the only 2 rooms he'd ever be in according to Alyssa. He didn't even seem to seek hanging out with friends. Sprawled out on Rocco's floor were a bunch of papers. The first piece of paper that caught her attention was this drawing of a handgun. It wasn't anything really alarming, it just further demonstrated his fixation on guns. Alyssa dug through the papers though, and found 4 pieces of paper stapled together with 3 different staples. They formed what could best be described as a little storybook. The first page looked to be the cover page, titled The Babysitter. Immediately, Alyssa assumed this little book was about her, but not wanting to get caught reading it, she took pictures of each page of the little booklet, as well as a picture of the handgun drawing, and left the room to go read it on her phone elsewhere. These were the pictures she had taken. This was the second page. Rocco wrote on it, "It was a regular day in the house, when Mom and Dad brought over the babysitter for the first time. There's something about her that I hate. I think it's how ugly she is. She's a huge nerd, I don't want her in the house. Not sure why my mom and dad hired her. I think I'm gonna have to kill her." The drawing on the page is what's supposed to be Alyssa sitting on the couch on her phone, and Rocco spying on her through the doorway. This was the next page. It's day 3 and she's still here. Parents think I'm a baby or something that needs an annoying, ugly babysitter that eats all our food and drinks. In this drawing, Rocco appears to be grabbing a kitchen knife while Alyssa's in the fridge. The child's disdain for his babysitter becomes increasingly apparent in a disturbing manner. But the next and last page is by far the worst. It says, "She caught me sneaking into her room. I have to be quieter next time." The picture is quite obviously Rocco holding a knife behind his back while Alyssa lay asleep in her bed. The implications of this picture are beyond transparent. Alyssa returned to Rocco's room while he was still in the basement, and lo and behold found a small kitchen knife on his bedside nightstand. Alyssa sent the pictures of the drawings and knife to Rocco's parents and then called them. At first the parents tried to convince her he must be joking around, but they were apparently easily convinced that Rocco could have monstrous intentions. They had Rocco's grandmother take over that same day. Alyssa left the house never informing the police or any other authorities. She accepted her payment for the 2 weeks that night, and she accepted the parents' apologies, but not without recommending that they take their son to get some serious help. few years back, I was staying at my girlfriend's dad's house with her for a month. It was situated between a large section of woods and a lake. Her dad owned many acres of land, including much of the nearby woods. He even had this little, I don't want to say path, but very narrow clearing in the woods that I'd like to walk through to clear my head. It was this one unnaturally foggy day that I wanted to go for a walk in the woods. I put on my boots that I'd use for hiking and told my girlfriend I'd be back in a little while. She didn't like to walk in the woods, so I'd always do it alone. Walking into the narrow clearing in the woods, I really took in how foggy it was that day. I couldn't see 15 feet in front of me. I hadn't seen it like that in years. In fact, I haven't seen it that foggy since. But as long as I'd stay in the clearing, I'd be able to find my way back. Walking through the clearing, I thought I could hear my footsteps being mirrored, as in synchronized with someone else's steps. So I stopped and listened. This was private property. Nobody should be here except for me. So I calmly called, "Hello?" When I didn't hear any calls back or footsteps, I felt it was safe to continue walking. The woods had a very eerie vibe with the thick clouds of fog floating through the trees. Crunches on the floor of the woods from my boots and the sounds of evening crickets was just about all I heard. A calming vibe. Then I heard it. A moaning-like breathing noise, like an old man moaning in discomfort. This time I knew I wasn't alone. It sounded like someone was hurt. I walked towards the noise concerned, once more calling out, "Hello?" I stopped when I sharpened my senses a little and noticed the figure of a person standing just far enough away in the fog in front of me where I could see their presence there, but that's just about it. Just a really tall figure in the fog. That was the person making the moaning sounds. I crept a little closer, asking if the person needed assistance, but I didn't exactly get a better view. So I walked a little closer, and still, it didn't feel like I was getting any closer to the person. I yelled this time, and the moaning stopped. I took 2 more big steps this time towards the figure, and that's when I realized that no matter how much I walked forward, this person, this figure, didn't seem to get any closer. I turned around and started walking back through the clearing in the direction of my girlfriend's dad's house. I looked over my shoulder about 5 seconds later and swallowed my gum, seeing that the figure now behind was still the exact same distance it had been this entire time. I started running, heart racing, running short on breath rather quickly. And every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw that figure hovering the same distance behind me. And I use the word hovering now, because I eventually picked up on the fact that I couldn't see the outline of the lower part of the figure's legs. It just looked like this floating apparition in the fog. I eventually made it out of the woods back to the yard of the house. I took one last look at the tree line while it was still in sight through the fog, and I saw the person, figure, apparition, whatever I should call it, right by the tree line. I burst in through the back door of the house, slammed it shut out of breath, and when my girlfriend, her dad, and her brother came in response to my noise, I pointed out into the fog at the tree line, telling them someone or something was following me in the woods, no matter how fast I ran. Her dad put on his shoes and went outside with me real quick. I pointed to where I last saw the figure in the woods, and it was gone. He patted my shoulder and told me I had nothing to worry about. With he and I being 2 6-foot dudes, and with the 2 dogs in the house, no one would be breaking in here. I laughed and pretended for a second as if I wasn't mentally scarred for life from what just happened. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or anything of that nature, but this was definitely the closest thing to paranormal I'd ever experienced. It still sends shivers up my spine to this day. While in the process of moving from my parents' place in Staten Island to Manhattan, I was using a lot of apps like Craigslist and Letgo for new furniture. I had already gotten the apartment in Manhattan by the point of this story, but I was still spending most of my time in my parents' house while I was still finishing up furnishing the apartment. I was on the app Letgo, and I found a really cheap, nice-looking dresser that matched the rest of my furniture. I messaged the guy whose name was Jake, and he was quick with his responses. We set up a time and place to meet that night, outside his house on some dead end by a little park. He said he worked late shifts, and his only available time to meet would be past 10 most nights. That was fine for me though. I didn't have work that week. The meetup time was 10:30. I wanted to be a little early because honestly the later it got, the sketchier things would feel. I got to his house at like 10:15 or maybe earlier, but it was an intensely foggy night. I couldn't even see if there were other cars parked in the street. Literally seconds after I parked at the dead end, I got a message from Jake on Letgo saying, "You're early. Just give me a second, I'll be right out." I thought, what in the world? How did he know I arrived that second? Was he watching from somewhere in the fog? Still, I replied, okay, and looked around even harder now. I realized there weren't really any houses on this street, at least not normal-looking houses. It was an unusually secluded street for Staten Island with some small buildings that I couldn't even make out what they were for. Eventually, Jake sent me another message saying, "Come on out, the dresser's waiting out back." Out back where though? I couldn't see anything. I got out from my car while replying back to him asking where I should go. That's where the responses on the app stopped, and the yells "over here" started. I followed the voice of this Jake person through the fog. I felt as if I were in some bizarre horror scenario. Following his voice, I'd occasionally shout, "I'm coming." I walked through this narrow alleyway-like thing between these two buildings. This wasn't a neighborhood street at all. I called out for Jake as I got through the alleyway to a backyard-type area. I didn't know if it was big or small because the fog, mixed with the darkness, wouldn't let me see more than 6 feet in front of me. Jake was no longer calling out for me. It just went completely dead silent, except for the sound of distant nighttime traffic. I knew in my gut something wasn't right. I was about to make my way back out of there. "Wait, your dresser's just right inside here. Come inside." I heard his voice in front of me, but I could not see him. I didn't respond. I just started backing away towards the small alleyway. I turned around, and I could see other people standing mere feet away from me. Even through the thick fog, I could see them just standing stiff up against some wall or fence. Something bad was going on here. I began a sprint back through the way I came, and I saw and heard I was being chased by at least 3 different people. I didn't run for my truck, as I wouldn't have time to get in, start it, and do a 3-point turn. I ran down the road till I couldn't run anymore and got the police on the phone. 2 police cars pulled down the road eventually. One of them picked me up when I waved them down. We got to the location and we went to the little yard area. There weren't any people still back there. The 2 little buildings were both abandoned storefronts. The back door was wide open, but inside was literally nothing. Do I even need to say it? No dresser, obviously. I showed the officers the Let Go conversation. All I had to do was give them the account that posted it, and that would allow them to open an investigation. But somehow nothing ever came of it. I'm not sure how thoroughly the police department even investigated this. All I know is something very, very bad was going to happen to me if I went in that building. Last Saturday, while I'm writing this, it was an insanely foggy day. My family and I are quarantined in Jersey. My wife was out shopping, and my son was in his room. I was trying to get work done on my computer in my office room when my 6-year-old daughter Veronica came inside, saying she saw someone in the garden. I left the office to the window looking in the backyard where the garden is. And indeed, she was right. There was someone standing over my garden. Their back was to us, but they didn't appear to be doing anything, and I know it sounds unbelievable, but I really couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. That's how foggy it was. I knocked on the glass to try and scare them away. I saw them turn their head, then walk over my garden deeper into the fog until we couldn't see them anymore. I told Veronica to wait inside while I slipped on my shoes and walked out into the fog real quick. The person only walked deeper into my property. See, we live in what I guess kids call bumblefuck, so I have a large yard. Obviously, seeing someone on this yard is unsettling, and my natural reaction was to follow in the direction I saw the person walk. I started to hear a rhythmic thumping noise, and as I got closer to my shed, I realized it was coming from there. The shed came into view when I got close enough, and I saw the person at the door of it, apparently slamming the door shut over and over again. I yelled, "Get out of here," before I call the police. I stepped closer and got a better look at the person. It was some middle-aged woman. She looked disheveled. She said sorry at least 10 times as she literally ran away from me in the direction of the road, quickly disappearing in the fog. Later that night, after my wife and I turned off the TV and tried to get to sleep, the dead silence in the room revealed a sound coming from outside. It was coming from the backyard, and I recognized it as the slamming of the shed door again. I felt sick realizing this. My wife was shaking me, telling me to go out there and chase whoever it was off. I didn't tell her about the woman because I didn't want to scare her. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed a flashlight, and turned on every backyard light on the house. I went outside immediately yelling, trying to sound intimidating. The slamming stopped. It was still foggy out. I had to walk a little bit to be able to see the shed. The shed door was open. The woman wasn't anywhere in sight. I have to admit, I was downright terrified to go into the pitch-black shed at that moment. I figured she had to be in there, but this is what you do as the man of the house. In my best words, I charged into the shed screaming as once again some intimidation factor, but the shed didn't have anyone in it except me. So I shut the door and twisted the little lock on the handle. I yelled some threat about calling the police really, really loud, and then went back into the house. I turned off all the backyard lights, and as I was walking back to my bedroom, Veronica came up to me crying. "What's wrong?" I asked her. She replied, "Look out my window." Those words hit me hard. I ran to her room, keeping the light off, and saw that woman standing at her window trying to open it. I got a clear view of the woman now, and her face was nothing short of horrific. She had droopy, cracked skin, her hair was wiry and grayish. She looked like her teeth were probably effed up too. There was clearly something wrong with this woman, and I had to assume she was dangerous. I screamed at her to leave us alone, and then went for the phone to call 911. The woman ran off for good this time. The cops couldn't really do anything except alert other officers over the radio. It's been less than a week, and yesterday my shed door was left open again from some point in the night. I'm really getting freaked out for my family. I fear one of these nights I'll wake up and she'll be inside the house. I rent out my South Carolina house on Airbnb whenever I'm not using it. It's a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house by the beach. 2 of the bedrooms are guest rooms, which are accessible to the people renting it. The master bedroom I keep locked with my clothes and certain belongings in there. That room is for me, and I have to keep my stuff somewhere instead of lugging it back and forth every time I go down there. I have a regular lock and then a deadbolt lock on there, so no one's ever getting in there unless they chop the door down or break through the window. But also, it's not like I keep anything super expensive in there, mainly just clothing. This was early last spring. It was still chilly up in Massachusetts where I live most of the year. I wanted to take a drive down to my South Carolina house for the week. For the most part, I work remotely, so luckily I'm able to do this when I want to. Ordinarily, I'd have my usual cleaning lady come and clean the house after each guest leaves. The cost of her service is baked into the price of the rental on Airbnb. But since I was going down right after the current renter would leave, I just pocketed the cleaning lady money and planned on going down to clean it myself. The last renter was a guy named Ramon. Through our messages, he told me he was renting with his fiancée and asked for good restaurants to eat at in the area. He seemed trustworthy. I always prefer to rent to couples or smaller groups of women as opposed to groups of young men, because they're usually the ones to come and get shit-faced and potentially damage the place. I started my drive very early in the morning. It was about a 16-hour drive, stopping only for a quick bite and to use the bathroom. By the time I got to the house, it was about 10 o'clock at night. I went to unlock and open the front door first, before going back to my car to grab my bags and go inside. I was shot from driving. I didn't even bother checking the place out or anything for a mess. I just went straight to my bedroom door to unlock it. I collapsed into the bed without brushing my teeth or anything. For those that haven't done it, a 16-hour straight drive will absolutely kill you. I crawled under the covers, and I was out like a baby in a matter of minutes. You'd think I'd have slept through the night, but no, I woke up in a black room. The clock next to my bed read 11:30 p.m. I had only been asleep for a little more than an hour. Something woke me up. I grabbed my phone to check for any texts out of habit. Then I turned on the bedside lamp. I looked around the room, then got up and went out to the living room. I took this moment to start analyzing the place. I didn't notice a single thing moved. Not a pillow, not a can of beer, nothing. I went to the bedrooms. Both were void of any people, though the covers on a bed in one of the rooms seemed to have been moved. So yes, they did come. I thought they may have been the cleanest couple to have ever stayed in my place. I have a camera set up on the front porch of the house. I never really think to check it unless a customer is giving me any kind of hard time, but I was curious. I opened the app to the camera system on my phone and went to the movement history. It picked up on a man entering the house via the code lock 3 days earlier. Just a man though, he had no woman with him. Strange. I checked for any other movement updates from then until the moment I showed up, which it also caught on video, and there was nothing. I checked it over like 5 times. I suddenly got the chills. I went to the Airbnb app to message Ramon and ask if he checked out okay, even though it was late at night. I went to check the bedroom where I presumed he slept in. I started checking under the bed and in the closets. I was yanking the closet doors open as if I were ripping off a band-aid. Each time, I was greeted with an empty closet. I moved along to the second guest bedroom. Both twin beds in here were still neat and untouched. As I yanked open the last closet he could have been in, I saw that it was empty. I sat on one of the beds for a second to just stare at the conversation between Ramon and I. That's when I heard the master bedroom door click shut, quietly, in a way that a person would have done it, not a draft. I went out to the living room and looked at the master bedroom door. I said, "Ramon, are you still in here?" with a shake in my voice. No response. I could see the light was still on in the room through the bottom crack of the door. I got on all fours to look under the crack of the door, and I fell backwards when I saw 2 feet standing not far behind the door, maybe a couple feet away. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen planning to grab the biggest carving knife, and it was already taken. By this point, my only logical option was to leave the house and call 911, and that's what I did. I waited out front until the police showed up. Then as we went inside, there was Ramon, waiting in the living room, no knife in hand. He spoke in this Portuguese accent, acting all innocent, saying he just needed a place to stay for one more night, which was complete bullshit. He denied ever picking up the knife, which was conveniently placed back in the knife holder now. After 30 minutes of 2 police officers outside talking to Ramon and 2 inside talking to me, they actually let him go and told me I should contact Airbnb and try to work it out with them. And I was just shocked. I felt like the police didn't do their job. After everyone left, I changed the lock code on the door, and I contacted Airbnb about what happened. Though I didn't receive payment for the extra day Ramon squatted in my house, they did apparently ban him from ever using the app again. It doesn't really feel like proper justice though, when he was potentially waiting to stab me in my own house, in my own bedroom. I'm 26 years old, still living with my parents. I'm not content with my job, and I'm in a relationship that I'm not too sure about. To say I've been stressed would be a monumental understatement. My mom and I were not getting along one week, and everyone was just bothering me. I wanted to escape for a weekend. I looked into little 1-bedroom Airbnbs up in the mountains, and found one for cheap. It was in Troutdale, Virginia, a couple hours away from us. And based on the pictures, it was this nice, private, and peaceful-looking little place surrounded by woods. It was the fall too, so the foliage was going to be beautiful. I told my parents I was going there for the weekend. My mom seemed overly happy about me leaving for the weekend. My girlfriend was more so just confused, finding it weird and suspicious that I was going away to some random cabin in the woods alone for a weekend. When Friday came, I packed a backpack full of clothes, toiletries, and my laptop, and I headed out for the road. It was around a 2.5-hour drive door to door. The area of Troutville was very quiet and scenic. It was a perfect escape from suburbia back home. I needed a nice weekend just to spend to myself. I was driving up a gravel road when my GPS told me I arrived. I saw an opening in the trees next to the road. The instructions the owner of the Airbnb gave me were to cut through this opening onto the grass and up the little hill. I did exactly this, and there I saw the cute little house sitting at the top of the hill. The second I stepped out of the car, I inhaled the fresh rural air, instantly feeling happy I did this. The owner told me where to find the key to the front door. I let myself in and checked the place out. It was a nice cozy living room, small kitchen, bathroom, and one loft bedroom that you had to climb a ladder-like stairway to get up into, and there was a circular window over the bed. Lots of light got into the house, which was nice. I went out to walk some of the trails the owner told me about a 5-minute drive away. On the drive back to the house afterwards, I noticed these two guys walking down the gravel road, and as my car was passing, they literally stopped in their tracks to turn and look at me as I passed. I waved and smiled, thinking they were friendly locals, but they didn't wave back. It was completely off-putting. They looked at me as if my driving down the road was a crime. I didn't look back. I turned into the entrance of the property and back up the hill. I started reading one of the books I brought with me in the living room with the fireplace going. It was incredibly cozy. The sun was on its way down, and after reading a chapter of my book, I realized I was getting hungry. I went outside to my car, about to drive to the nearest Walmart, when I noticed two men kind of running into the woods down the hill by the entrance of the property, probably in response to seeing me come outside. I wondered if it was those two guys from the road earlier. It was incredibly strange. I suddenly decided to take my laptop and backpack with me in the car while I was gone just to be safe. On the drive into town, I messaged the owner letting him know about this. He replied saying it's nothing to be alarmed about. There's a lot of teens in the area that walk around. So I dismissed it. I drove like 20 minutes to the closest Walmart since there were literally no grocery stores in the area. I picked up a few food items to hold me over, some milk, granola bars, fruit, frozen dinners, bread, and cold cuts. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was completely pitch black out. There were no streetlights on these gravelly roads, and with no neighboring houses, truly the only light was from my headlights. It was creepy for sure. I pulled up to the hill to the little house. It was almost hard to find in the dark. I grabbed my backpack and the grocery bag and went up to the house in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to see. Once inside, I locked the door immediately. It was creepy out there. I ate real quick and went back to reading my book by the fire, and pretty soon the lights to the room suddenly cut out, and the only light in the entire house was from the fireplace. I tried flicking on anything electric, but the power was gone. I went to message the owner again, who swiftly replied back to check the main breaker in the circuit box outside by the telephone pole near the back of the house. I didn't reply. There was no way in hell I was going out there. I was already paranoid from earlier. And why would the power be randomly cut out anyway? Something was off. I heard a creak in the floorboard from the darkest corner of the room by the bathroom door. I looked over and saw this tall, looming figure in the doorway of the bathroom, lit up only by the fireplace. My worst fear had been realized. This was actually happening. A soft yet deep and disturbing voice told me to remain calm and give him everything I had. I was so scared I could barely speak. I said all I had was my laptop and some clothes. He told me to empty my wallet of all my money, which I did. As he stood in the doorway, I still couldn't see his face. He told me to go into the kitchen and stay there. Moments later, I heard the door to the house close. I looked into the living room. My laptop, backpack, and money was all gone. I called 911 quietly to report a robbery. 20 minutes later, an officer arrived. I described the two guys I'd seen walking down the street earlier that day, assuming it was them working together on this. Basically, all the officer could tell me was that they'd be on the lookout for anyone matching those descriptions. I messaged the owner to tell him what happened, and he was sympathetic at first, or so it seemed. He said I could go home the next day, but he didn't want to refund me for my horrible experience. A trip I thought would be a nice detox for a stressful point in my life only made it worse. Luckily, my laptop was only like $400 and I didn't pack any expensive clothing, but it was still the scariest experience of my life. There is a small part of me that believes the Airbnb host may have something to do with it, because I still have no idea how that guy got into the house. So a few years back, after some friends and I graduated high school, we celebrated in the White Mountains National Forest Reserve. We only lived 2 or so hours away, so it wasn't much of a hike. We all packed inside my friend Alexis's car. Also with us was my friend Rob, his girlfriend Stephanie, and our friend Kelly. Alexis's car was a Hyundai Accent, so a very small vehicle. We didn't pack much. We were headed to this Airbnb in Carroll, New Hampshire at the height of the summer. It was a gorgeous drive. Once we got to the house, it was just as depicted in the photos, only the pictures didn't include the shambling looking shed next to the house. It seemed like it had seen better years. I probably could have knocked it down myself. Alexis joked around that maybe some old crazy guy lived in there, and that's why the place was so cheap. But we all laughed it off and unpacked our things. I'll be honest, I was really into Alexis, and I think she was into me, on account that she said we should share a bed. More so because the third bedroom had 2 doors leading to the outside and had a perfect view of that old shed. So she didn't want to sleep there, and she wouldn't let me. We both put our things in the living room and made the pull-out couch our bed. Not much happened the first night. A little later, we all sat in the hot tub in the garage/rec room. Alexis sat next to me, and we faced the woods, while Rob and his girlfriend were opposite of us. Rob's girlfriend couldn't step completely into the water on account of the stitches she just got. Stephanie and I were always good friends, and carried on with stories and joked about high school, sipping on our potentially illegally acquired booze. Kelly, on the other hand, was changing and not with us. Rob kicked my leg from under the water and winked, seeing how close Alexis was getting to me, but that wasn't too much of a deal. We tried to plan out our next day and talked about hiking to Mount Washington and the Flume Gorge. After a good soak, I eased into bed with Alexis and we watched Rick and Morty for a while until the clock struck 2 a.m. and we sat outside. The stargazing here was supposed to be amazing, and a bit later, Kelly tagged along with us. What happened next was hard to explain. In front of the house was this huge deck that we were sitting on. It was pitch black and no cars were around. More or less, we were in the middle of nowhere. No one really understands true silence until you're away from cars or planes for that matter. The sky was brightly lit, purple, blue, full of stars. Kelly hushed me one time. Just a few feet away from the porch, she heard some crunching, as if something was approaching the deck. There was definitely something walking out there. I waved it off as a raccoon or fox, until the steps sounded heavy, and I looked at Alexis. The fear began to set in as I noticed her gaze was looking towards the old shed where the footsteps had began. Quickly, I ushered the girls into the cabin and locked all the doors. I tried to explain to them that it's still possibly an animal, especially if animals had taken over that old shed. Easily, both of them calmed down. Kelly walked back into her room, and I again laid down beside Alexis. The next morning, I woke up to Rob and his girlfriend cooking breakfast in the kitchen, which was just across the room from Alexis and I. We had a big day planned out, and we did quite a lot of hiking, with most of us forgetting what had transpired last night, other than Alexis. When we came back from hiking, Alexis suggested exploring the old shed that was beside the house. Now that it was daylight, nothing that bad could happen, right? And I'll be honest, I didn't want to, but I didn't want Alexis to think I was a wuss. We opened the screen door, investigating the first room. There was an old, rickety rocking chair. Seemed it might break if I tried to sit in it. The next door had one of those brass doorknobs, but it was rusted and dented. I looked at Alexis before grabbing the door, and she groaned as she opened the door. There wasn't much to the room. The floor was dirt. There was dirt-caked windows and some trash on the floor. Alexis made a point that it smelt of cigarette smoke. It may have been the designated smoking spot in the Airbnb. We both shrugged it off and joined the others out back. Rob was starting a fire. Some typical conversation was going on. Rob poked fun at Alexis and I. The sun set and I turned off the floodlight out back to make the ambiance of our fire nicer. Some chuckles and stories are passed around, Rob and I boasting about our feats and whatnot. Then there grows a silence. That same crunching from last night is heard behind us, just against the tree line, except it was faster and headed in our direction. And just like that, there was a flash of green light lighting up the entirety of the backyard for just a moment. Whatever was running towards us halted, but my thoughts were ruptured by Stephanie's screams as she bolted towards the house. Behind us, a blood-curdling cry or yelp was heard, a deafening sound that at first we thought was a siren. I instantly stood up, yelling for everyone to get inside. Stephanie must have saw whatever it was that made that cry. In my bolt, I accidentally knocked over Kelly, who hadn't gathered the entire scene yet. I turned around to help her up. Rob was already halfway to the house. I ran to help Alexis gather our food items. Last thing we wanted if it was a bear for them to stay any longer. After that, I rushed Alexis to the back door, where Rob was waiting for us with some kind of bear spray. I already at this point had my Bowie knife out. I commanded him to go in, but he yelled at me to go in because he's got the range. The two of us saw this black mass walking along the outskirts of our fire. We didn't stay long enough to find out what it was. After meeting the girls in the living room, we called the police immediately. The officer reported to the house and looked all around with his flashlight, finding nothing. He clarified to us that the flash was due to lightning striking a nearby power line or transformer. As for the thing, he said it was likely a Fisher cat or something. But Stephanie said that she saw a man, hunched over with a cloak or blanket hung over him. Least to say, we didn't stay the next night over. The sheer paranoia of someone or something stalking us in the woods was reason enough. To say the least, we haven't returned to the mountains since. Who knows what's crawling around in those woods? In November of 2021, I was traveling from Philly to Las Vegas to compete in a jiu-jitsu tournament. I traveled the country a fair amount, and I would normally stay with whichever teams were also competing as a way to save money. This time though, for various reasons, I had to stay alone. I booked an Airbnb not far from the Vegas Strip. I did so kind of hastily, and didn't realize that the neighborhood wasn't the greatest. I thought of canceling and booking something else, but went against my instincts and rationalized that it was close to everything I needed and I wouldn't be spending much time there anyway. I got to the location and didn't see the host. I wouldn't know who to look for anyway, since the Airbnb profile picture was of a flower. The host gave me the key code to the room I was staying in, a small studio apartment that shared a wall with the host's house. There was only one door in and out of the studio. The first red flag was that the key code for the lock on the door was 1234567. I thought that was weird, but the password for the Wi-Fi was password, so I figured that the host was just an older person who wasn't tech savvy, and the reviews for the room were pretty good. Around 9:30 p.m. is when things got creepy. I was close to falling asleep when I heard a tapping on the window in front of my bed where I was laying down. There were drapes covering the window, so I couldn't see who was making the noise. I responded by saying, "Huh?" loud enough for whoever it was to hear me. A minute or two went by in silence before I heard the tapping on the window once again. I said, "Hello?" pretty loud, and it went away. I was pretty on edge at this point and immediately wrote a message to the host asking if it was them tapping on the window. About an hour went by before they finally responded saying, "I was going to bring you some water, but it seemed like you were asleep, so I left." I was still very much on edge, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep. I contemplated going for a walk to the store or taking a shower just to clear my mind, but something told me to just sit tight and wait to see what happens. About 45 minutes went by. It's about midnight at this point, and I heard some noise outside. I then heard the distinct sound of someone trying the key code on my door. The attempt failed, but I could hear them trying again. This time I heard the sound of the lock disengaging. The door was unlocked. I threw the blankets off of me and ran to the door as it was opening up towards me and slammed it shut in this person's face. I was yelling, "This is my room, get out of here, leave." They responded in a deep voice from the other side of the door, "Madel said this is my room." Madel was the name of the host. I kept responding with what I said before and called the cops. I spoke loud enough so they knew I was on the phone with the police. Police eventually came and were not surprised at all by the story I told them. They said they would hang around until I called an Uber to leave. The host was very combative and unapologetic. Their alibi for who that person was changed multiple times. When the Uber arrived, I jumped in and felt relieved to be getting out of there. It still creeps me out that I never saw the person who was opening my door. I have a feeling that it was some kind of setup. If the host knew I was flying in from the East Coast, The 9:30 p.m. tapping on the window would have been equivalent to my 12:30 a.m., and the invasion would be about 3 a.m. Maybe it would have just been a robbery, but it could have been much worse. My boyfriend Sean and I went on a trip to Vermont in the summer of 2016. I booked us a stay in an Airbnb that was listed as off-grid cabin. It had a few hundred reviews with a 5-star rating, so I didn't think it looked sketchy. The cabin was an old, one-room cabin with a potbelly stove and a loft area. There was no electricity, and it was in a remote part of Vermont down an old dirt road. There was one house about half a mile away that was owned by the host, and she was away, so we were alone. We got there around 4 p.m. and had a really nice evening cooking dinner and playing board games by candlelight. We had hiked all day and were exhausted by 10, so I went up to the loft to sleep while my boyfriend decided to sit outside and smoke. About 20 minutes later, while I was in that space between deep sleep and consciousness, I was jolted awake by a large banging sound on the side of the cabin. Before I could yell down, Sean yelled up to me asking if that was me. Confused and feeling like I must be dreaming, I groggily yelled, "No, was that you?" He said no, but didn't seem too worried since he was sitting outside and didn't see anyone. We go camping frequently, so it takes a lot for us to get freaked out by random noises in the night. We figured it was probably a tree branch that broke off and fell against the cabin. I started to fall asleep again when there was another loud bang, like a thwacking sound from another part of the cabin. At this, I jumped out of bed and climbed down from the loft. I met Sean as he was coming through the door. He told me to grab all the sharp things that I could find and go back into the loft. He was putting on a calm demeanor, but I could tell he was a little freaked out. I asked him what he thought it was, and he cautiously said that he didn't know. He said he didn't see anything when he was outside, but he thought he might have heard footsteps. As we were whispering, we heard a small, slow scraping noise that trailed for about 3 feet against the wall of the cabin, then silence again. I was pretty scared at this point and didn't know what to do. Our car was parked about 100 feet away from the cabin, so we would have to face whatever was out there in the dark in order to get to it, which is probably what they wanted. I was also afraid that if this was a human, that they might have done something like slash the tires or block our ability to get back down the driveway. Sean told me to stay very quiet and go back up to the loft while he sat downstairs and waited. He had a hunting knife and a large stick, and I had a few steak knives, but otherwise we were sitting ducks. The downstairs of the cabin had huge windows on 3 walls, half of which were just screens, so if someone was outside, they could easily be watching us, or could slash through the screen to get inside. I wanted to stay downstairs, but Sean ordered me to go upstairs, saying that it would be easier to fight this guy without me there if it came to that. I went up and sat in the middle of the bed, clutching an array of knives in my fists. I don't think I ever listened so intently before. Sean yelled out hello to see if he could get any response, or perhaps scare it away if it was an animal. We heard nothing for what felt like 20 minutes. Then the scraping sound came back, much louder, like someone was dragging a rake or a hoe across the side of the cabin. I heard clear, methodical footsteps trailing off around the side of the cabin. Sean then came up to the loft and pulled the ladder up. He said he didn't like how they could see him, but he couldn't see them, and if they came in the cabin, he could at least get the jump on them from up here. We sat on the bed in silence. I was looking at him in terror. It was probably around midnight at this point, and I realized that we were going to be stuck in that cabin until morning. The noises continued and intensified. There was more banging that seemed to be coming from all different sides of the cabin. Intermittently, the scraping returned. This could not have been an animal. The sounds were too methodical, and we didn't hear any grunting like there was a bear or bobcat. And there were constant footsteps, pacing footsteps. There was a clear crunch of one foot going in front of the other all around the sides of the cabin. There would be pauses of 10 to 20 minute intervals. Then it would all start up again. At one point there was a strange rattling sound on the outside, like someone was trying to shake or climb the pipe on the outside of the cabin that fed into the potbelly stove. This carried on for hours. Sean and I just laid in that bed, paralyzed in silent fear, staring into each other's terrified faces. I kept waiting to hear the front door burst open or the screen window rip. I was convinced that we were both about to be murdered, and every gruesome possibility kept playing in my head. I have never been that terrified, but no one ever came into the cabin. We never heard any voices, whispers, deranged giggling, or anything. Just the loud scraping, banging, rattling, and footsteps. Finally, around 5 in the morning, We started to hear roosters in the distance, and the loft was slowly lit by early dawn light. The sounds finally stopped. I got about 2 hours of sleep, because we had to drive into Pennsylvania later that day. My car was thankfully fine, and we packed everything up as quickly as possible to get the heck out of there. Sean looked around the cabin, trying to find scraping marks or clear footprints, but there was nothing. I messaged the Airbnb host to tell her about our experience, and she said it must have been a porcupine. If you could find a porcupine that makes loud banging noises and can walk like a human, let me know. To this day, we debate about what it could have been. Sean thinks it was a crazy local trying to scare us away. Either way, I'm really glad I was not murdered that night. I once booked an Airbnb by myself in an area in Arizona that I had a job interview. Since it was so far from home, I made a short trip out of it. I went with this one specific Airbnb because it was much cheaper than any hotels I could find. It was about half an hour away from where I'd be interviewing for, which was fine with me. It was off some dead-end, secluded road and had a nice view of the desert in the backyard. I brought my laptop with me to get work done at my at-the-time current job during the day, so that kept me busy most of the days I was there. I stayed for 3 days. My interview was on the second day that I was there, which was a Tuesday. I would be leaving Friday, so on Monday, the night before my interview, I was practicing interview questions for this specific company, and just generally getting some last-minute knowledge on their firm. I was doing this on my laptop in the living room of the little house, probably around 9 p.m., when there was a tap at the window. I say tap because it wasn't exactly a knock. It sounded more like it could have been someone's finger. My head, of course, swung to the left to look at the window in reaction. I didn't see anyone, but it was also pitch black outside. I was kind of scared to look out the window, but I had to be a man and just do it. And there was no one as far as the eye could see. Just darkness. Of course, maybe it could have been a bug hitting the window. We've got some pretty nasty bugs here after all. The next day, I got through my interview and thought I did pretty well. So for the rest of my little trip there, I explored different parts of the town in my car, ate at different restaurants, and sat in the backyard and relaxed in the sun. Little did I know, I was likely being watched while I was in the backyard. That night, I was inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix when it happened again. A single tap at the window. Now it was obvious it wasn't a bug. I was even more disturbed now, but once again rushed to the window. Even though I saw no one, that didn't mean someone wasn't out there. I checked the windows by the front door, then opened the door and looked outside for a second. Since there was no one there, I went back inside and then went to the back door. I stepped outside onto the back porch and looked out to the desert behind the house. Silence and darkness, and then I heard a click. A sound someone made, like clicking their tongue at the roof of their mouth. It was off in the distance, beyond the light from the house. It was out somewhere in that cold desert. I felt as though someone could be hiding behind any number of those bushes, watching me and toying with me. I yelled out, and almost as if they did it in response, there was another click. I pinpointed the direction it came from and looked that way. I could see someone now, standing not too far away, dressed in dark clothes, blending into the darkness of the desert. I started walking a little closer, then stopped, realizing I didn't want to get any closer to that person. I called out, "You're on private property. I'm going to call the cops if you don't leave." And I saw the person eerily quickly walk away. I theorized it was the Airbnb owner, but obviously that was a stretch and I didn't really know what to actually think. The night following, I was in my bed on my laptop watching Breaking Bad again before going to bed. I think I watched 2 episodes, so I was doing this for about an hour and a half. I didn't hear any noises in the house, though I was definitely giving thought to that encounter from earlier while watching the show. When I finally turned off the light in the room and tried to fall asleep, within 10 seconds, there was a click sound again, muffled from the inside of the closet. I looked at the closet door, which was open just a crack. Then, a pretty natural response, I sprang off the bed, still in my PJs, and ran to the car. I sat in the driveway with the car running, and I called 911. I stared at the house as I spoke to the dispatcher, waiting to see if someone would come out, because all of my stuff was still in there. A police car arrived, and upon entering the house, we did a quick investigation of the house together. It was very small with not many places to hide. Conclusively, I still packed my stuff and left that place that night for a nearby hotel. I contacted both Airbnb and the host, and I was only able to get a partial refund for my stay. I still think it may have been the host of the Airbnb. I mean, who else would have access to the house? There were no signs of forced entry, which leads me to believe whoever it was may have had a key. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a stranger who snuck in at an opportune time. For my friend Ryan's 21st birthday, I threw him a surprise party at my house. I invited all of our friends in our group, plus some acquaintances and friends of friends who were brought along. My parents weren't home for the night, so it worked out nicely. The peak of the night was when Ryan walked in the door and all of us got to scream surprise. It was a Friday night, so mostly everyone drank a decent amount. I tried not to get too drunk, just so I could stay alert in case anyone was doing something dumb in my parents' house. We had cake and other desserts set up for Ryan too. I did a lot of walking around offering cake and beers to everyone, even people I'd never met before, including one guy with long blonde hair and a football shirt sitting on my couch, and some dude who looked a few years older sitting on my grandma's old rocking chair that she gave to my mom. I whispered into Ryan's ear at some point that half these random dudes that our friends brought over looked either kinda creepy or odd. He agreed with me, a bit over-enthusiastically, but that's probably because he was a lot drunker than I was. The night progressed and everyone got drunker, and everyone was doing increasingly silly and dumb things. The guy who was still in the rocking chair started to hum a song really loudly and obnoxiously. The rest of us just watched and found it hilarious for some reason. Then the guy with the long blonde hair started to sing a completely different song, and everyone else kind of just joined along. It was a room full of drunk 20-something-year-olds singing very loudly. It was a fun time, but eventually it had to end, and people started leaving one by one as they sobered up. A couple of people stayed the night because they were too drunk to drive, including Ryan and our friend Sean. I slept in the living room with them. We left the TV on, with the movie The Hangover on in the background. I suddenly thought to ask the two, who were those two guys who had been in the living room on the couch and in the rocking chair most of the night? Sean said the guy with the long blonde hair was a friend of one of our other friends, but as far as the guy in the rocking chair, neither of them had a clue. I decided to text everyone in the group chat we had made prior to the surprise party to find out who was friends with this creepy dude in the rocking chair. One by one, our friends said they had no idea. It seemed everyone assumed he knew someone there, but apparently that wasn't the case. I was waiting on two more friends to answer, but I was pretty sure one of them had to have known him. Anyway, Sean and Ryan fell asleep quickly, so I decided to go to sleep too. I woke up an hour later though, I guess to the sound of the TV. I checked my phone, which was sitting on my chest. There were a bunch of texts from the group chat. To put it short, every single person in the group chat said they had no idea who that was. I sat up to let that sink in better. Some random, creepy-looking older dude snuck into my house and hid in plain sight for hours. I suddenly looked around the living room, lit up by the glow of the TV. I felt as if my entire house was unsafe and that we weren't alone. I quietly stepped out from the living room towards the kitchen. I went over to the tiny hall that separates the kitchen from the 3 bedrooms on the first floor, still using the glow from the TV in the living room as my light source to navigate. I think because I didn't want to draw attention, I guess. I stepped into the hall and froze. I was pretty sure I could see something at the end of the hall. It was too dark though. I took a couple steps forward, and it became more clear that there was a person standing there at the end of the hall. Then to make it even worse, I heard a faint, low, cackling kind of laugh at the far end of the hall. I slowly backed away without acting fazed at all. Meanwhile, I felt like my heart dropped to my stomach. I got back to the living room and shook my 2 friends awake. I whispered to them that someone was in the house with us. I got on the phone with the police and talked as low as I could into the phone so that the woman on the other end could still hear me. And as I was on the phone, I saw the creepy guy from earlier, the guy who was on the rocking chair all night, suddenly walk out to the living room, look at us sitting there, passed us, and walked out the front door. I was literally frozen. I think my friends were too. I told the 911 operator that the intruder just left my house. She said lock all the doors and we should be fine. A cop came by for a few minutes just to check in. After he left, my friends and I found a trail of blood stains on the carpet in the hallway. The stains led to the end of the hall, where I saw him standing. Then it just stopped. Needless to say, no sleep was had that night. I'm sure we all have those memories from our childhood that make us uncomfortable to think about. How we were so young and innocent and unknowing to something bad that was about to happen. I was in the first grade. It was either a Friday or a Saturday night. All I know is we didn't have school the next day. My friend's mom set up a little party for his birthday at a local bowling alley. All his friends and their parents were there, and we were sectioned off into different lanes to play with different groups. I wasn't having a lot of fun, mainly because I stunk at bowling, and still do to this day. I remember complaining and crying to my mom that I didn't want to play anymore, and I think one of the kids started taking my turn for me. There was a back room sectioned off for the party with a bunch of snacks, sweets, and sodas. So while my mom was talking to some of the other parents, I think that's when I snuck to that back room to fill my stomach with cupcakes and other sweets. There was a door leading to the outside in this room. It led to the back of the building, I guess. And the next thing I remember was the moment a man was standing at the doorway telling me to come outside and check something out. To this day, it still makes me cringe, thinking back and remembering that I actually listened to the random man and went out there. Upon stepping outside, the man knelt down to my level so that we were face to face. Then he pointed at a truck that was running maybe 5 yards away. I remember he said he had the rest of the sweets and snacks in the back of his truck, and he needed help unloading it. He also offered to give me a $20 reward if I helped him. Now, I'm sure in my 6-year-old mindset, I was thinking about how cool I'd look, and how jealous all the other kids would be. I followed the man to his truck. He opened the back door for me, and pointed at a big black plastic bag sitting in his back seat. I climbed into the truck, and the next thing I remember was the horrific, ear-piercing scream of a woman. It was my mom, standing at the back doorway of the bowling alley, screaming my name over and over. I ran to my mom, who grabbed me and held me tight as I heard the sound of tires skidding out, followed by a truck speeding away. I turned to look, and the truck was already gone. My mom was in tears, scolding me. A few other parents and kids came out, and it turned into a huge scene. It was a traumatizingly embarrassing experience for me. The bowling alley had to shut operations for the night, and the party had to be cut short. I've asked my mom about this story so many times. She said the police arrived after my dad picked me up, and my mom told the police everything I told her. She also got a decent look at the man and his truck, so she gave a description to the police as well. Unfortunately, nothing was ever heard as far as the police catching him. All I have to say is, if any of you are parents, burn the phrase "don't talk to strangers" into your kids' heads. For my son's 12th birthday, my wife and I threw him a little party in the backyard. We invited the whole family, as we usually did for any of our kids' birthdays, and let him invite all of his friends too. We live in rural New Jersey, so our backyard connects to forest on 2 sides. We also have a pretty big property, which allowed us to space out a bunch of tables on the grass with food and refreshments. The little party went into the night. Most of our guests left, but closer family and some of our friends stayed late. It was probably 8 o'clock. The mosquitoes were out in full force, so I decided to run over to the shed at the far end of the backyard by the woods to fetch the tiki torches. I grabbed like 6 torches and set them on the grass while I went back in to look for fuel. However, while I was in the shed, I heard steps in the woods. I stopped what I was doing to take a look out there, but honestly, it was just too dark to see out into the woods. After finding the fuel, I went back to the part of the yard everyone else was at and pitched the torches into the ground. The 6 torches gave off a decent amount of light while keeping us safe from the blood-sucking pests. There were about 6 kids left, including my son, and they all wanted to play hide-and-seek in the woods. My wife and I allowed it, just making sure to tell them to stay close to the tree line. My son and his friends went to play their little game in the woods, which left the rest of us to sit in peace for a little bit. It was a solid 15 minutes of talking with relatives and hearing the kids laughing and yelling in the near distance out in the woods. But all of a sudden, the yelling turned to screams. Concerning sounding screams from the kids. All of us looked at each other, sitting up in concern. The kids one by one came running out of the woods, yelling that there's something in there. We don't have bears or any big predatory animals around here, so that was not the first thing we assumed it to be. I told all the kids to stay near the patio area. My brother Dom and I, being the biggest men there, decided to go investigate. We took a couple flashlights and off we went into the pitch black woods. The only sounds we heard around us were crickets and other night bugs. So we went deeper, and that's when we started to hear something else. It sounded like an animal at first, but as we followed the sound to get closer, the sound started to become more human-like. We continued to walk, and we agreed we both had the feeling that we were being watched, like stalked. I put my arm out to stop Dom. Standing in the silence now, the best way I could describe the sound we were hearing was a moaning, angry kind of sound. It sounded human, but it was a bizarre sound. Then, a few cracks of the leaves on the ground ahead of us. We aimed our lights over there, and there was someone or something behind the tree. The moaning sound stopped. Dom stepped forward and called out. What happened next was textbook horror movie stuff. A scream, so loud, so blood-curdling, so inhuman, filled the air. I'm sure it could be heard for miles. Dom and I turned and booked it back to the property. We waved at everyone to go inside when we made it back. Dom got on the phone with the sheriff's department. They said it was probably a wild animal. We wanted to insist it was a human, but we honestly couldn't. We to this day don't know who or what we saw and heard in those woods, but it was definitely stalking us and the kids when they were playing hide and seek. And that scream we heard, it just didn't sound human to us. I live on Long Island, New York. When I was a kid, our block used to throw a yearly block party. I had a few friends on the block that were in my grade, Mike and Danny. We would always hang out together at these block parties. My neighbors would go all out. There would be tables of baked goods, catered food. Some neighbors even had tables of alcohol out. Of course, we were like 13. No one was going to let us drink at that age. It was a Saturday, and people were setting up for the block party early in the day. The street was already closed off. It didn't really pick up until around 3. The three of us invited some other friends to come, and most of the day we were just messing around on the blow-up attractions or just eating people's baked goods. Eventually, some of our other friends left and it got dark, but the party wouldn't end until late at night. Danny and I started joking about how I could beat him at MLB, and while Mike and one of our other friends named Steve were somewhere else on the block, Danny and I decided to take a break from the block party and play each other in MLB. About an hour later, we went back outside to look for Mike and Steve. We ran into Steve, who said Mike went into his house like forever ago and didn't come out. So we walked through the block party down to Mike's house and saw his parents, who told us he went inside. We saw his bedroom light was on and he was standing at his window. We started waving at him to come down. It didn't seem like he even noticed us though. Screaming over the blasting music would be kind of useless, so instead I said let's just go inside his house. We walked over to the stoop and tried the door, but it was locked. So we went around back to try the back door. This one was actually unlocked, so we let ourselves in to find Mike and tell him to come back outside. Naturally, we went right up the stairs towards his room. His door was cracked open, and naturally I went to push it open expecting him to be in there. Instead, there was this tall man standing by the window looking outside. his hands resting on the windowsill. I backed up away from the door, frightened but more so confused. I knew Mike's family and I had no idea who this guy was. I backed away from the door and signaled for the other two to be quiet. I told them to go downstairs in as quiet a voice as I could. We didn't know if that was one of Mike's relatives or not, but either way, it was rude of us to barge into Mike's house like that, and we didn't want any relatives we didn't know to catch us. We left and went outside back to Mike's parents to ask who the man inside at the window was. They looked up at the window of their son's bedroom, and Mike's mom let out a short scream, followed by his dad running towards the house to unlock the front door. We watched as the man standing at the window turned and disappeared, as we stood there waiting in anticipation. A crowd started to form, and it became a scene as people were asking what was going on. 5 minutes later, Mike and his dad came outside to the crowd. He had already called the cops. Mike was apparently hiding in his closet after he saw a random man from his room walking up the stairs. The block party was shut down early, and the cops pulled up briefly. They searched the house with Mike's dad, but couldn't find a man anywhere. I remember going home that night scared shitless, and I could only imagine at the time how scared Mike must have been. I woke up in the middle of the night and my mouth was really dry, so I went downstairs to get some ice water. As I shut the fridge, I noticed something through the curtain in the kitchen. There's a light on the side of the house above the kitchen window that stays on all night, and it was exposing some shadow that wasn't usually there, shaped like a person. I knew better than to lift that curtain. I went straight to my parents' room and woke my dad up, who heard about the event that took place earlier down the street. He came down to look, but when we got to the kitchen, the shadow outside the window was gone, which confirmed it was a person. My dad went outside to run around the property real quick, finding no one. I don't know if he fully took me seriously and believed I saw a shadow, because for some reason he didn't want to call the cops. I like to think I'm pretty sure that was the same man outside the window that night. What were the chances there could be such a coincidence that same night? I slept with one eye open that night. Something very traumatizing happened to me when I was a very little kid. I was like 5 or 6. A nearby street was having a block party, which is basically just where a block is closed off to traffic and all of the neighbors on the street chip in for food and activities. My older brother, who was like 11 or 12, took me with him to this block party. It was a weekend, so our parents were a little more lenient with the curfew. My brother apparently had some friends on this block, and he met up with them, with me following behind him. I remember him introducing me to some of his friends, but I was a really shy kid, so I didn't really say much to them. Most of the night was a blur because it was just so long ago, but somehow I got separated from my brother. At such a young age, I remember panicking that I was lost. I was looking around everywhere for my brother. Eventually I bumped into some tall old man, and he knelt down and asked me something along the lines of where was my family. Then he said he didn't recognize me from the street. I told him I was there with my brother, but I lost him. He started acting all concerned and told me to come with him to his house so he could call my parents. I was naive and I followed him, ignoring the words of any parents, "Don't talk to strangers." He led me through the crowd as I held his hand, and we got to his house. Once inside, he looked at me and smiled and asked if I wanted any snacks. I nodded my head shyly. He went to his pantry and grabbed a bag of chips. Then he told me to follow him upstairs. He led me to a small bedroom upstairs and told me to sit on the bed as he pulled up a chair in front of me and just sat down. He told me to eat the chips, but I didn't. I nervously asked him to call my parents, and I believe he said he would in a moment. I honestly can't remember whatever creepy stuff he may have said, but he eventually made his way off the chair and onto the bed next to me, making no signs of trying to make the phone call to my parents. He put his arm around my shoulders, and that's when the doorbell rang, and it was the most relieving sound I could have imagined. He looked at me and told me to wait there. Of course, when the old man got downstairs and opened the front door, I ran downstairs seeking the aid of whoever was at the door, and it happened to be my brother, his friends, and a couple adults. My brother was told by someone that I was seen entering the old man's house earlier. My brother and the adults questioned the old man and I, mostly asking me why he brought me into his house. I gave my best 6-year-old detailed description I could. It probably was enough for everyone to realize what might have been about to go down. One of the adults brought my brother and I to her house, where she called my parents and then the police. My mom and dad were over in a heartbeat, and the cops followed shortly. I asked my mom and dad before writing this what I said that got the cops to arrest the old man, and it was simply that I said the old man lied about calling my parents and started touching me. I didn't ask my parents anything else, because quite frankly, I don't like talking or thinking about it too much. I'm just grateful things worked out the way they did, because I'm sure they were about to go very south. My block had a block party in 2017. It was the first and only one ever to date. Our block sits right in front of a small section of woods, so woods connect my and some of my neighbors' yards. During the block party, some of us started getting bored because it was mostly catered to the younger kids of the block. But there was this one creepy, shady guy walking around the block. He had some big can-like thing in his hands, and he kept spouting gibberish to people. Eventually, he came up to my friends and I and started saying the most random shit that honestly wasn't even coherent. We just walked away, assuming he was on drugs. Pretty soon after, 5 of my neighbors and I were down to play a game of manhunt with the field of play ranging from one house across the block party to the woods behind the houses across the street. I was on Jess and Kenny's team. We started in my backyard. The rule was we all had to hide in different places. So I told them I'd hide in the woods and try to sneak my way around the houses through the woods, and I suggested different hiding spots for them. I waited in the woods for a while, expecting to see someone from the other team enter my backyard. Eventually, one of them snuck into the yard, and that's when I thought it was safe to start migrating. As I moved along, I started noticing some paint-like marks on a bunch of trees. They appeared to be big red X's, and in that immediate area, just about every big tree had an X painted on it. I heard screaming from the yard in front of me, meaning someone from the other team was chasing Kenny, so I ducked down and held position for a few. As I was idle in that position, I started hearing footsteps deeper in the woods, and I heard a spraying-like sound. But the noise stopped before I could even turn around. I realized there was someone standing over there, deeper in the woods. The lights from the nearby houses was just enough to see him. He was looking at me. Apparently he stopped what he was doing when he spotted me. He started walking over to me, and I realized when he got closer that it was that creepy, crazy-seeming dude from earlier. Suddenly, that can in his hand made sense. When he was like 10 feet away, he started speaking. He kept saying, "X marks the spot, X marks the spot." I told him to fuck off as I turned and ran back to my backyard. No one was back there anymore, so I ran to find my friends in the block party and told them the game was off and explained what I just witnessed. So all 6 of us together marched back to the woods behind my backyard, and we started looking for him. He was nowhere to be found, but I did show my friends all the red X's he sprayed on the trees. I showed it to my dad later in the night when the block party was over. He told me there's nothing we could really do about it, and to just get a good night's rest. That night, I had a bad dream. It was about that creepy man from the woods. In this dream, he would just keep chasing me through the woods as I heard his creepy voice saying X marks the spot. Then I would hear him spraying his can of spray paint. And that's when I woke up, in my pitch black room. I looked at the clock, and it was only like 1 or 2 in the morning. Then, on the other side of my window, right above my bed, there was someone talking. My whole body jumped. I looked out the window, and there was a big red X painted right in the center of it. And behind that was the crazy man with the can. Though muffled, I heard him saying X marks the spot over and over, and he stood there looking down at me in my bed. Then he started hitting my window with his elbow, clearly trying to break it. I ran to get my dad, who's a huge burly dude. He looked out my window and saw the nut job still hitting the glass, which had yet to crack surprisingly. My dad started yelling taunts at the man, like he better be ready for an ass beating. Then my dad ran out of the room for the front door. I think it worked in scaring that whack job off because he stopped what he was doing and ran away. When my dad got to my window, I pointed him in the right direction and he ran off down the block. He was gone for a while. He didn't come back for like 10 minutes. He couldn't find the guy, but judging by the size of that crazy man, I know my dad could have pummeled him to the ground, and I wish I saw it happen. The story doesn't end there, however. The reason I decided to tell this story now in 2019 is because just a few days ago, there was a big red X drawn on our front door, as well as a bunch of trees in the woods in our backyard. 2 nights ago, I even heard footsteps passing my bedroom window at some odd hour in the night. We don't have cameras, but my dad is thinking about installing some now. If anything else happens, I will update. It was a cold December night a week before Christmas. My family always does Christmas in our Hamptons, New York summer house. The Hamptons are always quiet this time of year, as a large chunk of the real estate there is owned by rich people who have 2 or 3 other houses elsewhere in the country. My dad and I were at the house first before the rest of my family, as my mom and sister still had work until the next weekend. My dad was retired at the time, and school was over for winter break for me, so we wanted to just go to the Hamptons house early. We all have our own bedrooms in this house, which sits on a quiet dead-end road. My dad turned on the heat and water and all that stuff that he always has to take care of when we return for the first time in months. I brought my PS3 to play in my room. I spent most of the first day there playing video games. On that first night we were there was a big snowstorm, another reason we wanted to come early, to beat the crappy road conditions that would come for days after the storm. The next morning when I woke up and went out to the kitchen, my dad asked me when I built the snowman. I responded, "What do you mean?" He said the snowman in the backyard. I went to look out the window, and there was at least 2 feet of fresh snow. But there was also a snowman sitting in our backyard. It had 2 sticks for arms angled up into the air, and it had eyes and a smile carved into the head. The eyes and mouth side was facing the window. I said to my dad I didn't build that. My dad laughed and said, "Must be the neighbor kids." My dad thought it was an innocent joke, so I did as well. The next night is where things got bad though. I was in bed asleep and suddenly woke up to a distinct thump on my window. I was terrified. I pulled the blankets over myself to hide, to not be in view of whoever might be out there. But after 5 minutes, I started to wonder maybe it was snow that fell off the roof and blew into the window. I got up to peek out the window. I screamed because at first I thought what I saw was a person, but it was actually another snowman standing right outside my window. There was an angry frown on this one instead of a smiling face. I screamed for my dad and he came rushing inside. I pointed at the window, and this time he wasn't happy. He said he would go next door in the morning and talk to the kids' parents. I slept in my sister's room the rest of that night. The next morning, my dad went next door and rang the bell, but they weren't home. There were no cars in the driveway. That meant they weren't even in town. That was the only nearby house with kids in it, so this didn't exactly help explain the situation. For 5 or 6 days straight, nothing else happened until Christmas Eve night. The rest of our immediate family, plus all 4 of our grandparents, were now in the house. We were in the living room. This was before dinner, but it was already dark out. Someone knocked on the front door instead of using the doorbell. We weren't expecting any other family. I started to get nervous. My dad went over and asked, "Who is it?" Someone on the other side of the door started saying, "Please let me in, I need help." The door has no peephole or windows, nor are there any windows that would allow us to see who was on the other side of the door. My dad asked what's wrong, and the voice on the other side said, "I have no one to spend Christmas with, please help me." We all looked at each other now, and my dad yelled to please leave before we call the police. The person on the other side said, "Okay, I'll leave, please don't call the police." He never opened the door. We instantly tied this to the creepy snowmen. We knew it had to be connected. And we were right. On Christmas morning, there was a note taped to our front door. It said, to the best of my memory, I just wanted to have a little fun. I built the snowman for the boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend the holiday with. Hurt. In one way or another, I think whoever left that note on our door and built those 2 snowmen was mentally ill or unstable. It's very unlikely that it was meant to be a joke, considering he came to our front door. I think he was dangerous, and even if he wasn't inherently hostile, the fact that he did what he did is just enough for him to be considered somebody none of us wanted to meet. It was Christmas of 2016. My name is Andre, and at the time I was 21 years old. Our family was all at our Uncle Joshua's place for the holidays. Well, it was Christmas Eve. My immediate family, plus my cousins and other close family, decided let's go to my uncle and aunt's place in downtown Miami. We come from Connecticut, so we're not used to warm weather around the holidays. It was Friday, the day before Christmas Eve. My brother Nico and I, being young single males and being in Miami, wanted to go out. We were hearing about a bunch of Christmas-themed parties going on at clubs and bars. Nico was 18 at the time, but he had a fake ID, so we figured he'd be alright. We went to this one club on Miami Beach that was having a Christmas-themed event. Mostly everyone online was wearing Santa hats, so it felt festive. But it was all a waste of time because at the front of the line, the bouncer not only told us it would be $100 to get in, but he also called Nico out on his fake ID. So we tried a bar not too far away, and we got into this one. There were some people wearing Santa hats here too. I guess that was expected on the weekend of Christmas. While we were at the bar, this older woman started talking to Nico. I overheard most of their conversation. The woman appeared to be mid-40s, and I heard her keep telling my brother how she has such a thing for younger guys with Hispanic accents. To be honest, it sounded kinda creepy and weird, but Nico was probably blinded by the fact that a woman was hitting on him. I just let him do his thing. The woman was wearing a blue Santa hat and had on a sexually provocative Christmas sweater. The 2 of them were talking for so long that I ended up making friends with the guy sitting next to me at the bar. Then suddenly Nico patted me on my shoulder and said he's gonna leave with the woman. I told him alright. I was happy for him, I guess. I stayed at the bar not much longer after that. Then I just called an Uber back to my uncle's, assuming Nico would be spending the night with the woman. I was mid-Uber ride when my phone rang. Nico was calling me. I picked up to static. It sounded as though maybe he pocket dialed me, but I heard a male's voice in the background that didn't sound like my brother. And then suddenly another male's voice could be heard yelling. I said Nico's name over and over trying for acknowledgement, but the call eventually disconnected. Obviously this was a pretty concerning phone call. I was under the impression he was alone with a woman. I tried calling him like 10 times, and finally someone picked up. But it wasn't Nico. It was the voice of some older man with an extremely deep voice. When I asked who this was, he said he found this phone on the sidewalk. I asked him if he could drop the phone off at my uncle's place or if he could meet me somewhere. He didn't answer that. I just heard talking in the background, and then I heard screaming. It was Nico's voice in the background screaming my name, screaming help. Then the call disconnected. I asked the Uber driver to pull over as I was freaking out trying to call anyone in my family. It was late, no one was picking up. I explained the situation to the driver, and he advised I call the police immediately. That's what I did. The police came to my uncle's place, where I woke my family up, informing them that Nico was in trouble. I had to give my best description of the woman's appearance from the bar and what time he left the bar. Then my dad and I, along with the police, went to the bar that we were at, and it was then that I got a phone call from a random number. It was Nico. He was out of breath, gasping into the phone, explaining that he was kidnapped and barely escaped. He was currently using a stranger's phone. All of us went to Nico's location, which was a sketchy street somewhere in North Miami. When we found him, his face was a bloody mess. He had 2 black eyes, and all of his possessions that he had on him were stolen. He gave his whole story. He left with the woman who claimed to have called an Uber or Lyft. When the alleged ride arrived at their pickup point, which was in some quiet back alley area, Nico found out once inside the car that it wasn't in fact an Uber. It was a trap. There were 2 men in the car who immediately held him down and threatened to shoot him if he didn't keep quiet. They started to drive for a while, and during this time, one of the men called my number and they threatened to harm him if he yelled out anything, which he did, and that explained the bloody face and black eyes. They broke his phone, took his wallet, keys, and whatever else was on him. As the car was stopped and he wasn't being held down anymore, he ran for it out of the car. They didn't chase him, the car just sped off and disappeared. He said he believed they were going to kill him and dump his body somewhere if he didn't run. Police apparently were never able to identify the woman who appeared in the video footage from the bar. Nico said none of the men were wearing masks, more of a reason he thought they'd kill him. This completely ruined the entire holiday weekend, but we were all just happy he was alive. On Christmas night, we were all awoken to Nico's screams in the middle of the night. He was screaming, "She's in the house." I woke him up from whatever nightmare he was having. I have to say though, him screaming "she's in the house" made me think back to her creepy smile and made me sleep with one eye open that night. I bought a small house with my brother George a couple years back. We hosted Christmas the first year we lived in the house just as a way of getting the family to see the place and getting everyone together for the first time in forever. We don't have the biggest family in the world, so it was the two of us, our parents, our aunt and uncle, cousin, and our sister and two nephews. Our sister came with our nephews and her husband first to help us out with the cooking and preparing. They brought their dog Mika along as well. Since they lived 2 hours away, they were going to be spending the night at our house. The rest of our family lives under an hour away, so they wouldn't be staying. Not that that house would have much more room for additional people staying over anyway. During our Christmas dinner, at one point we talked about some of the murders that happened in our area recently. Bodies had been found in the woods in our county. It wasn't a topic that we kept going long, as our mom and my sister wanted us to drop it for the sake of the holiday and the kids. After dinner, we all had some wine in the living room with a Christmas movie on in the background as we talked. After a few hours, the family started to slowly leave, until it was just my brother and I, and my sister, her husband, and her kids. The kids went to bed before us. The four of us stayed up later having more wine. My girlfriend ended up coming over past 10 to spend the rest of the night with me, since all of her family had gone home. Eventually, Christmas night was over, and it was time to go to bed. I woke up to my girlfriend shaking me. The room was still dark. I groggily looked at the clock next to my bed, and it said 2-something a.m. I asked my girlfriend what the issue was, and she whispered, "Listen." I listened and heard Mika out in the hall growling. I got out of bed and entered the hall to see what was going on. Then I saw that the back door to our house was wide open, and a breeze of cold air started to hit me in the face. Mika was looking out the door. I checked if anyone was out there, and as I was at the back door, I heard my brother's voice call out my name from the darkness outside. He sounded like he was far away in the woods. I was worried he was in trouble or needed help with something. I went back to my room to tell my girlfriend as I put my shoes and coat on. I stepped outside with a flashlight. There was a light dusting of snow on the ground, enough to see footmarks leading from the back door down to the back deck towards the woods. I yelled back George's name very loudly. I heard his voice call back my name. It was confirmed he was in the woods now. But oddly, as I entered the woods, his footprints slowly faded and got harder to see until they were just impossible to continue following entirely. I screamed back at the top of my lungs, "Where are you? What's wrong?" I once again heard George's voice call back just my name. Every time he called me, his voice was the same distance away. I was uncomfortable getting any further away from my house because I didn't want to get lost in the woods. I tried finally calling George's phone, but he didn't pick up. I continued a little further into the woods, but now George's yelling stopped. As much as I yelled out into the woods, there was dead silence. Not even the sound of a bug in the freezing cold. Just the sound of the light breeze. And suddenly my phone rang. I was hopeful it was George, but it was my girlfriend. I picked up, and she said, "Chet, George is in his bedroom right now." "What?" I said. That didn't make any sense. I was hearing his voice this entire time in the woods. I asked her to check if my sister's husband was also still on one of the pull-out couches, and 30 seconds later, she said yes. Suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone in the woods, like anyone was about to grab me from any direction. I turned back the way I came and started running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I saw the backyard light from my house becoming more visible through the trees. I made it back to my house, and everyone was awake now. George and everyone else had a look of horror on their faces when I explained that Mika was growling, looking at the wide open back door, and the fact that there were footprints leading into the woods. But the scariest part was that I thought for sure that the voice I was hearing was that of George. and whoever it was knew my name. We contemplated calling the police for half an hour and then ended up doing so. A police officer came and just asked us any questions like if anything was stolen, if we know anyone that may mean us harm, etc. Then within half an hour, and after telling us to call back if anything else happens, he left. I don't know if I think this had anything to do with the murders that were going on at this time in our county, but I did think it was worth mentioning in the story. Nothing else did ever happen after that night, but we can't for the life of us logically explain any of this. I'm still scared to go in or near the woods past dark. I'm sure we've all gotten computer viruses at some point in our lives, ranging from basic malware to Trojan horses. I was one day going through my school email when I was a teenager. There was this random, suspicious-looking email. It was apparently a job offer, or rather an offer for an interview for a summer internship position with this company I'd never heard of. There was a link at the bottom of the email that said it led to the company's website, so I clicked on it. A new web browser opened, but the web page never loaded. The loading bar was stuck at like halfway, and the mouse cursor had the loading symbol as well, but it just wouldn't ever load. It was only a white screen. After refreshing the page a few times, leading to nothing, I closed the page and deleted the email. The next day after school was when I noticed my computer was working overall much slower. It took a while to start up, it took a while for programs to open. Sometimes the mouse would even freeze for a few seconds. It was extremely aggravating. I attempted to do a disk cleanup to speed it up, but it didn't do anything. I tried restarting it a few times, did nothing either. So I decided to use my mom's desktop computer in the basement to do my homework. The next time I turned on my computer, things were a lot worse. A pop-up kept coming up on my screen that I'd never seen before. It kept saying in all capitals, "Error, error." And every time I tried to exit out, another one would pop up. My mouse was locked to the window, meaning I couldn't move the cursor anywhere outside of the little window. At this point, I knew I had some kind of virus, though this was the most aggressive virus I'd ever seen. I pressed Ctrl-Alt-Delete repeatedly until it finally responded, and I was able to bring up the task manager and restart the Explorer, which actually fixed the issue. I was able to use my laptop again. So first thing I did was rush to download an antivirus program and hope that it would detect whatever was on my computer. The program did detect a large number of viruses and malware on my laptop, so I purchased the full version so that it could perform a deep, thorough cleaning of my computer. After a couple hours of me playing StarCraft on my computer, the program alerted me that the scan was complete and the viruses had been removed. But my laptop didn't exactly go back to normal working speed after that. Days later, I had a new suspicious email when checking my school email account. It was titled, "Open this now." I guess I'm a fool for choosing to open it after just getting a virus that I suspected was from that first suspicious email. Upon opening the email, I realized it was blank, but that there was a .zip file attached. The contents were unknown to me, but I didn't want to open it and find out what it was, so I deleted the email and went about my day. However, a few hours later, the next time I got back on my laptop, another error message kept popping up on my screen like last time. This time it said, "You didn't open your email," in all capital letters. I Ctrl-Alt-Deleted myself out of the pop-up once again, with my heart now racing. I opened my email again, and there was another new email, again titled, "Open this now," this time in all capital letters. Feeling threatened, I opened the email and downloaded the content. It was a collection of videos of me through my webcam. It was just me sitting there using my laptop. I don't want to get into detail, but I felt sick to my stomach when I realized the video captured me doing some embarrassing things. Along with the videos was a text document containing only my address. There was one more video in a separate folder. It was taken inside of a van speeding past my parents' house, and a creepy man's laughter could be heard over the sound of the wind blowing into the car. I placed a piece of tape over my webcam, saved all of my important files to a bunch of flash drives, and did a factory reset of my computer. Before doing that, I replied to the email that I was getting the police involved, and that's what my parents and I did. We reported the emails and evidence to the police, and they said they'd use their forensics team to find the culprit. Unfortunately, this hacker really knew what he was doing, because they weren't able to track him. I'd say this happened around 5 years ago. This game came out that I really wanted but didn't want to drop $60 on it, so I may have looked for ways to download it for free. I found some website off Google. It had some quick text tutorial on how to download the game for free, involving simply clicking the download button at the bottom of the page. The program started installing. By the time it finished, I opened the folder, but there was no game in the folder. It was just a bunch of weird text documents, so I already knew I was scammed. I deleted the folder from my computer at once, and that was that. Or at least I thought it was. After that, I'd periodically start hearing these weird sound effects and short 20-second cartoonish songs playing in the background on my computer. I tried to find what could be causing it in the task manager, but I couldn't, so I restarted my computer, and that seemed to fix it at least for a little bit. But then, as the week progressed, I noticed more and more stuff acting up. I'd get bizarre pop-ups, and random Internet Explorer tabs would open with sketchy websites and advertisements. My antivirus program wasn't doing anything to fix the issue, so I was planning on taking it somewhere to get it looked at the next day. In the meantime, I turned the computer off for a couple hours and just did other things with my day. When I returned to my room to prepare for bed, I turned the computer back on to see if anything had maybe changed. Upon signing into my account and getting to the desktop, I was greeted with something I wasn't expecting. My desktop wallpaper had been changed to some grotesque, horrific creature standing outside of someone's window. I nearly fell back in my seat as I saw this. No one in my family could have done this, as I have always had passwords on all of my devices. I turned my computer off by holding the power button for a few seconds this time. I didn't turn it back on that night. I planned on bringing it to the Geek Squad first thing in the morning before I had class. I went to sleep early since I didn't have my laptop to really do anything on. I woke up at some bizarre hour. It was still completely pitch black outside. I woke up startled from something, but I didn't know what it was. Not until I heard it again. It was a loud, aggressive bang at my window. I looked at my window, which had the blinds angled half closed. I somehow gathered the courage to get up and twist the rod, angling the blinds open completely. I saw something taped to the glass on the other side. I took my phone and rose the screen up to the window, revealing the same picture as what had been set as my desktop wallpaper. I didn't see who put it there. I didn't care. I went to get my dad and show him. When he saw the picture, he went under his bed to grab his gun and storm outside. He screamed at the top of his lungs that if whoever was out there ever came back, he'd unload the entire clip into their skulls. The next day, the picture on the window was gone. I took my laptop to the Geek Squad, and the two workers who were helping me said my computer was flooded with different types of malware. And after I told them my story, they were convinced I got a virus from trying to download that game, which apparently opened the door for new viruses. This somehow led to me becoming a target of some serious hacker who, to this day, I still don't know why they targeted me. I didn't get my laptop back for 2 days, but they worked their magic, and my computer was once again clean. I think my dad scared off whoever was stalking me, and just knowing how protective my dad is, and the fact that he has a gun, was the only reason I was able to sleep after that. I'm currently 26 years old, so this happened 3 years ago because I know I was 23 at the time. It was my last semester in college. I had to do an extra semester to fit all my credits. I was doing really poorly in one of my coding classes, so I used some forums a lot to help. I was reading a specific post regarding C++, and some deleted user posted a link to an archive folder allegedly containing answers to the textbook problems that I was currently working on. That was actually a godsend given my current situation, so I downloaded it. Not that I ever condone cheating, I was just undergoing an unbelievable amount of stress with this class. I used WinRAR to decompress the folder and view the contents. Interestingly enough, there was another compressed folder inside the folder I just decompressed. When I tried to decompress this one as well, I saw it was password protected. In one of the text documents titled README, it said to obtain the password, run the file titled run.exe. I checked the folder and saw there was in fact a file called run.exe, so I ran it. Biggest mistake I made. My computer made a weird noise. For half a second, a small blank window popped up, then disappeared. Nothing else happened, so I tried running it at least 3 more times. But when nothing happened, I gave up and put the folder into the recycle bin. It wasn't until the middle of the night that something else happened. I woke up to a screaming sound from inside my room. I nearly shat myself. I found myself pushing up against the wall at first, dazed and confused. I saw the light of my laptop screen glimmering through the closed lid. The screaming sound seemed to be coming from my laptop as well. See, I keep my laptop on overnight, just plugged in, but I always keep the screen closed. I didn't understand how the laptop screen could be on or how it could be making noise if the lid was closed. The sight and sound emitting from my laptop in the middle of the night was surreal. I felt scared approaching it to turn it off. When I opened the screen, my desktop wallpaper was changed to a disturbing, screaming face of this horrible creature. It was nightmarish. All my desktop icons were gone, and the taskbar was red. I couldn't move the mouse, and pop-ups shortly started appearing, all of them saying run, all as that horrible screaming continued. I held the power button on my laptop until it turned off, and I unplugged the cord. Obviously I knew I had a virus, but that was just something else. I booted my computer into safe mode the next morning and restored it back to an earlier date, and that did the trick. But a few days later, I received something in the mail with no return address. Inside the envelope was a big printed picture of that screaming face. On the back it said, "Run." I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, which was a mistake because it could have been used as evidence. But I never received anything else in the mail after that. When I think back now, I wonder if that .exe file wasn't named run as in telling you to run the file, but rather it meant run. I take my dog Hemi for a walk twice a day and let him in the yard once. When I take him for a walk around the neighborhood, I always try to take different routes just to keep it from getting repetitive, not just for me, but for Hemi as well. Oftentimes on the weekends, I take him for longer walks since I have more free time, and I don't have the stress of other work-related things still lingering in my mind. On a cloudy, humid Saturday evening, it was one of those times that I decided to take him on a long walk. I'm talking like almost an hour. We were in a part of the neighborhood I wasn't too familiar with. I found a walking trail that was part of the town's huge nature preserve. It was a rather low-key path. There didn't seem to be any other people on it but me. It was a rather narrow path with woods on either side. It wasn't a cement bike path like the other trails in the preserve. Hemi led the way, pulling the leash harder than usual, probably excited by all the new random smells he was picking up. Eventually on the trail, we passed this little square park. It had a swing set and little playground, along with a basketball court, or rather what was once a basketball court, as there were no hoops. I decided to walk in through the little opening, as Hemi was going crazy over something. I was planning on just sitting on one of the benches facing the playground to take a break because I was getting a little tired, but when I sat down, Hemi kept pulling and started barking at something. He'd only really do that when he saw another dog or animal, sometimes people, but less often. So I entertained it and got up and started giving him slack to run towards whatever he thought he saw. I looked into the woods but couldn't see anything. The closer we got, the more aggressive Hemi got, until he was basically choking himself with the collar trying to pull me into the woods. Then out popped a man from behind a big tree. He was laughing and saying, "Whoa, whoa, he caught me." I told Hemi to calm down and pulled him away from the woods. And the man. I apologized for my dog and walked away, as the way in which he came out from that tree was bizarre. He said, "It's all good, dude," as he seemed to follow in the direction we were walking. Hemi kept looking back and barking. I continued to tug him forward. Eventually, I had to turn around and ask if there was something I could help him with, as he even seemed to follow me outside of the park and onto the trail. He put his arms up in the air and smiled. Then he said he just wants to pet my dog. I said, "Nah, he doesn't like you, man. We're just gonna walk our own way." He didn't reply, so I turned and continued walking, faster now. Hemi kept turning around and growling, and every time I'd look back, he'd be the same distance away from me, kind of off the trail a bit, half hiding behind the trees like he thought he was being slick. I was about to call back at him to piss off, but then it hit me this guy might be dangerous. I started running down the trail until I came to the little opening we entered from and exited through that. Back on the streets, Hemi would keep looking back as we ran, but I'd have to tug him to keep running. We ran all the way back to my house without stopping. I actually do cardio regularly, so I wasn't concerned about that guy keeping up. I highly doubted it, especially since Hemi stopped looking back eventually. It was now a couple hours after getting back. Hemi was in his bed, which was right next to mine, when he unexpectedly lifted his head to look at the window, and he growled. At first I thought it was because of the sound of the rain droplets that had just begun to hit the outside of the window. I was thinking about getting up out of bed to close the window, even though I was already comfortable in bed. Then it happened. A voice speaking into the window, a voice I recognized from a few hours ago, asking if I knew why he was in the woods. Hemi started going crazy. I jumped in my skin and turned to the window. I couldn't see his features or face, but I could see the outline of his body at my window. I yelled, "What do you want?" He calmly asked if I saw what he was doing in the woods. I told him no, and he asked me, "Are you sure?" I said yes with a tremble in my voice. He said okay, and I saw the outline of his body move away from the window. Hemi stopped growling after a few moments. I closed the window and latched it. I wouldn't have been able to sleep that night without calling the police. I told them I was followed by someone in the park, and that he came to my window. The dispatcher asked if the man left, and I told her to my knowledge, yes. She said if he were to come back, to call 911 again. She implied it was a busy night since it was a Saturday. I did feel comfort knowing Hemi would give me a warning at least if he were to come back. He didn't end up coming back though, thank God. The man's words, "Did you see what I was doing in the park?" still don't really make sense to me. I wonder if he were implying he was doing something he didn't want others to see, and that he was worried I witnessed it, but that alone would raise even more questions. It was a regular night in the summer of 2010. I was taking my dog Poppy out for his nighttime walk. I usually take the same route. Sometimes I'll stray down one different block, not always though. This one night, I branched off a familiar block to a not-so-familiar one. All that I knew of this block was that there was an abandoned house on the corner. It's known as the Murder House. I've only ever passed it while driving. The first time I saw it, I slowed down just because it's such an eyesore, sticking out like a sore thumb from the rest of the houses. I never could understand why the town wouldn't just tear it down and build a new home, especially given the house's history. The reason no one ever bought it was because of the murder of a young woman inside, potentially by her boyfriend. He was never to be heard of again. No body, no signs of leaving, nothing. Walking down the block, I saw the house slowly getting closer. I already planned on stopping in front of it to take a look, but Poppy actually stopped before I even did and just looked at the house. I could tell by his ears and his head tilting that he was engaged by something. I looked around the neighboring houses, which were spaced out generously. And our neighborhood has a lot of green, meaning tons of bushes and trees lining the streets. Plus, it was as dark as could get out, and the house was conveniently situated in a gap between the streetlights. It didn't seem like any of the neighbors could possibly be watching me from where I was, so I started walking onto the grass of the property, but Poppy stayed in place. He started to growl and make whimpering type sounds, like he was frustrated. I pulled him hard enough, and he started to follow onto the property. He was fixated on a window that was opened. I stepped onto the house-length front wooden deck and walked to the window. Poppy was still making growling and whimpering sounds. I pressed my face up to the screen of the window, surprised the window was even left open. I started to wonder if maybe someone was still managing this house in some way, whatever that would even mean. Inside the house was dark, but not pitch black. I could see the walls to the empty living room, and then the opening in the wall that led to a back room with another window. As I was observing, I heard the sound of something inside the house, like a blunt object hitting the floor. It came from further back in the house, like in that back room. Having my dog with me gave me some kind of weird confidence boost to go through the side of the backyard. The backyard was literally huge. The grass was very tall, indicating I was likely wrong about any kind of property management. Only thing in the big yard was an old wooden decrepit-looking shed in the corner. The door to it was slightly open, but I was more curious about looking in through that window. As I looked inside, I couldn't see anything except an empty black room, probably what was once a mud room. Poppy was looking at the shed, not barking or growling though. He was kinda silent. I walked quietly towards the shed, tugging him slowly and softly to keep him quiet too. The door was open enough for me to look inside the giant shed. It was not empty. There weren't tools or bicycles or anything. There was just this skinny girl standing in the middle of the otherwise empty shed. I say girl, but I couldn't tell if it was just a girl or a woman. Poppy suddenly went ballistic, barking and making these noises I could only describe as a dog's version of screaming. He wasn't pulling to go inside of the shed, he was pulling to get away. The girl's head inside the shed turned to the door and I ran. We ran. Poppy and I ran for 3 straight blocks until I was out of breath. Then we walked the rest of the way back to my house. I went to a house nicknamed Murder House, where a young woman was killed potentially by her boyfriend. And then I witnessed a young woman standing in the middle of that empty shed. I don't know if I believe it was an apparition, or just some girl by chance trying to explore that abandoned house just like me. I was 10 when my parents let my brothers and I get our first dog. I'm the middle sibling, and it was always my older brother and I's job to walk the dog. Our dog's name was Nyla. Nyla was a golden retriever. My brother would walk her in the afternoon after school, and I would walk her at night. I don't remember anything about what kind of night it was. Cold, warm, weeknight, weekend, nothing. All the details I remember are what I'm including in my recounting of this experience. I was like halfway through my walk with Nyla when she looked across the street and her tail started wagging. She started barking and tugging to go say hi to this dog that was being walked by a man across the street. The man made the decision for the both of us to cross the street and allow our dogs to say hi. His dog was a very tiny, fluffy dog. I think it might have been a Maltese. His dog seemed very timid and like he didn't want to be bothered by Nyla. The man asked my name and I gave it to him, and he told me his name. I don't remember it honestly, but we got into this long conversation about our dogs. He really seemed to like Nyla, and Nyla kinda liked him. He was telling me how his golden retriever had recently passed away and he had a bunch of toys and dog supplies that he'd love to give me. I figured, why not? It's my lucky day. He said his house was around the block, so he led the way. I was walking kind of next to him though as we walked. We were in the street the rest of the way back, but the residential roads are usually quiet. After kind of awkwardly walking back to his house, he let me in first. His house was okay, modest, nothing special. He led Nyla and I into the kitchen as he let his dog go run off into a different room. He asked me to have a seat on one of the stools by the island in the kitchen and asked if I wanted anything to eat. He offered me a bag of chips, and I accepted it. He handed me a bag of some off-brand potato chips. Then he just sat on the stool next to mine and started petting Nyla. He was awfully close to me, and then he looked down at the bag of chips, I think, as if he were waiting for me to open it. I put it on the island in front of me. He just sat there petting Nyla, not saying much. I was wondering when he was going to get the dog supplies he promised. He didn't show any signs of doing that though. Instead, he was asking me personal questions, making awkward small talk with me. At one point I remember he even patted my knee as if he were my father or something. I remember an overwhelming feeling of discomfort suddenly, so I finally asked about the collar, toys, and other supplies he mentioned. He said he'd be right back and go get it. He said it, not them. I remember picking up on that. He left through one of the 2 doorways in the kitchen. Then I heard him stomping downstairs to the basement. Moments later, I heard him call up to me to come downstairs and check out some of the stuff he wanted to give me. I got up just to walk over to the basement door, still deciding if I'd want to go down. But then Nyla started growling at something behind the open basement door. I looked. There was someone crouched down in the dark hallway. I didn't really know what to think, but I just left the house in a hurry. I got home and didn't say anything to my family. I just went to my room the rest of the night, quiet and shooken up. It was the first and only time I ever felt I was about to be targeted for being a young age. My only explanation was there were 2 men in that house, and the second I'd walk into that basement, the other would have shut the door on me. I didn't tell any of my family about it simply because it made me uncomfortable and honestly slightly embarrassed. Telling the internet anonymously is completely different. After moving to the dorms for college, I started drinking a lot more than I did in high school. It changed me. During winter break, I came back home to my parents' house to spend the holidays with my family. New Year's was just becoming a holiday that I looked forward to, since it entailed a lot of partying with other people my age. It was New Year's Eve night. My parents were out at a friend's party. I had my 2 best friends over. I'll call them Jim and Steve. That was really our hometown squad back then. We didn't have that many other friends that liked to go out. I had them over to drink and hang out while we figured out our plans for the night. Jim apparently was talking to this girl who invited him to a party across town. She told him that we could come too, so that was our plan. We downed a few shots of rum, then polished off a few cans of beer each, and we each were pretty drunk. Jim called an Uber to the address the girl gave him, and we all split it 3 ways. Jim said he never met this girl, but that they matched on Tinder a week ago, and that she was really pretty and seemed cool based on her texting style. The Uber driver pulled us up in front of some storage-looking building. This was apparently the address. We were confused. Jim read the address over, and we all confirmed on our phones that this building was what came up under the address. Before allowing the Uber driver to leave, Jim confirmed with the girl he was talking to that it was in fact this building and not a house. Almost instantly, she texted back confirming this. So we all got out from the Uber, and then he slowly disappeared down the street. We made jokes about not really wanting to go in and calling the Uber to come back, but ultimately we ended up just going in. We looked for an entryway, and it seemed there was a small door left open with a big guy standing by it. We approached him and asked if this was the party. He nodded his head and pointed in the doorway without saying a word. Pretty sketchy. We walked into this very dark, narrow hallway, following a lone ceiling light hanging at the end of the hall. We were getting closer to the sound of the loud, rumbling music. We got to the end of the hall and found the opening to, I guess, what was supposed to be the party floor. It wasn't nearly as big on the inside as the outside. It was very dark, the only lighting being from a couple cheap-looking strobe light machines. There wasn't a huge crowd, maybe 20 to 30 people sprawled out throughout the area. No one was really dancing either. Everyone was kind of standing in their own little circles. A lot of people were just sitting in chairs by themselves, kind of eyeing us down. The weirdest and most off-putting thing of all, though, we didn't see any females. The music was very loud and hard to talk over, so we moved to a corner further from the speakers and the crowds. I yelled at Jim to call that girl and ask her where she is. She texted back saying she's in the back section, just beyond the double doors. She told us to meet her there. This didn't sound right, and I told Jim that. He said we'd just take a peek back there and leave if she's not there. Jim led the way, following the directions from this girl. We went through these 2 doors held open by door stoppers into this dimly lit narrow hall with a bunch of doors. As we walked, someone quickly appeared from one of the rooms and whispered something in Jim's ear. Jim kept saying what, looking very confused. Then he turned to us and waved his hand saying, "Let's just get out of here." We didn't question it. As we walked back through that little main dance hall, I could tell we were getting looked at again. Some big guy at one of the doors tried stopping us for whatever reason. We just walked through him back down the hall we came through. We noticed he was following us, and finally Jim yelled run and started sprinting down the hall. That's when I knew shit was real. We followed, and the guy behind us yelled at the top of his lungs, "Yo, stop them," probably to the guy standing at the entry door. He didn't really make an effort to stop us though when we ran back out the front door. We ran out of the little parking lot into the closest main road, where we called an Uber again. Jim explained that the dude in the hall whispered in his ear to get out of there before midnight, as they were going to trap everyone in there. Jim didn't ask any more questions. He basically just told us to haul ass out. This led us to believe that girl he was talking to didn't exist. It was just some kind of trap to lure unsuspecting victims into whatever was about to go down in that building that night. We made an anonymous police report that something was going down in there that night, and that it should be investigated and shut down. We spent midnight on that New Year's sitting in my living room by ourselves. We never found out what transpired in that warehouse. It was New Year's Eve of 2016. My girlfriend and I were hosting a party in my condo. I invited about 30 people and said they could bring whoever they want as long as they were respectful of my place. As we were setting things up for the party, we kept losing things and then finding them back in the same place a few minutes later, like the TV remote, her bag, or just anything we seemed to need at the moment. We thought we were just imagining it, but it kept happening over and over. We figured it was the two of us just accidentally moving stuff without the other knowing. Our guests started pouring in around 9 to 10. That's when we told everyone to arrive. Since my friends would be bringing friends, I positioned some of my surveillance cameras in rooms with valuables, such as the living room and the bedrooms. By the time everyone was over, things were still kind of disappearing. Like at one point, I wanted to show my friends my new pair of shoes my girlfriend got me for Christmas, and I couldn't find them. And even more, my window was left open in my bedroom. Albeit it was a party, and I had to assume my girlfriend or some of the guests had to do with some of this stuff. But it started getting weird. Nevertheless, the condo was crowded, and I didn't have much time to be worrying about this stuff. I told myself I'd check the surveillance footage after the party, or if things persisted, I'd check it during the party. There were a handful of faces I didn't recognize, but I met most of them through whichever friends brought them over. That time of the night that people either can't wait for or dread finally came, and we all started to gather around the TV to watch the ball drop in Times Square. I looked around the room and noticed some tall guy in a black trench coat facing the wall opposite the TV. He was looking down at the couch doing something. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who that was, but everyone started counting down, so I turned my attention to that and joined in. Everyone yelled Happy New Year and all that, and anyone who came as a couple got their New Year's kiss. And when everyone settled down a bit, I realized that tall guy wasn't in the room anymore. I asked Alan if he knew who that tall guy was, and he said, yeah, that's Tom's friend. So that was that. One of my friend's girlfriends eventually came downstairs and said whoever the guy in the trench coat wasn't leaving the bathroom. I told her it was Tom's friend, and to just use the master bedroom bathroom, so she went back upstairs. Eventually the clock hit 2 a.m., and that's when things were dwindling down and people were starting to make their exits. When everyone was gone, my girlfriend and I said we'd clean up tomorrow. However, we did a quick inspection to make sure nothing was stolen. Her bag was gone completely this time, and so was one of my expensive watches. I rushed to our bedroom to pause the video cameras so I could download the footage and play it back. We started watching for the time guests started to arrive. I had it on fast forward, and we just skimmed all 3 cameras. Eventually, we noticed Tom's friend in the trench coat in the guest bedroom, going through our stuff. I paused the footage in a fit of rage. I cut the footage to a 30-second clip and sent it to my phone, and then texted Tom immediately. I said, your friend stole shit from my apartment, bro. He texted back, dude, no way, what do you mean? Then I sent him the footage. A minute later, he texted back, who the hell is that? I don't know who that is. I wrote back, I was told that was your friend. Once again, he said, dude, I don't know that guy. My girlfriend and I got nervous now, so I went on a texting spree, texting all of my friends who came, asking if they knew that person. From everyone who was still awake, we got a bunch of no's. So we went to finish the video footage, following the guy in the trench coat. He made his way into our bedroom, opened the door, then started dropping some of our belongings out the window, including my girlfriend's bag. I felt like the room was spinning and my heart was in my throat. Then, the man in the video quickly turned around as if he heard someone coming up the stairs, and he crawled under the bed. We sped through the rest of the video footage, but he never got out from under the bed. Under the bed that we were currently sitting on using the laptop. I saw the fear in my girlfriend's eyes and her temptation to scream, but I covered her mouth with my hand and whispered in her ear, "Run on the count of 3. But she couldn't help it. She let out a cry. So I had to yell at her to just run out of the room. I pushed her off the bed and followed close behind. I took a look under the bed before slamming the door shut, and I saw him down there under the bed. We made eye contact. It was an indescribable moment. We called the cops in the kitchen, both grabbing big kitchen knives. Police made it to my condo in like 3 minutes, but by that time the intruder was gone, and our bedroom window was once again open. He escaped through the window and got away with our belongings. I handed over the video footage files to the police department, and they would review it and record an image of the man's face. Of course, he was never found, at least not by our local police department. My dad has always been too nice of a guy, like a pushover. I'll just start the story with that. I don't say it for no reason. We live in uptown Chicago. We don't have a huge family, so our Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings are always small, like less than 6 people. This was Thanksgiving night of last year, 2019. Dinner was almost done already. My dad was picking up some last-minute foods like stuffing and cranberry sauce at the corner store since we didn't have any. My mom and I started setting the table, while my brother and grandparents sat at the table. My dad finally returned, but with more than just stuffing and cranberry sauce though. He brought someone along with him. It was this middle-aged, dirty-looking man in a green puffer jacket and black pants. He looked homeless. My dad introduced the man as Stefan, and said he would be joining us for dinner tonight. My brother and I exchanged surprised, uncomfortable looks. Then my mom and I did the same. As my dad started preparing the stuffing, he was telling us how he met Stefan alone in the cold streets, and said we as a Christian family should do the right thing and invite him into dinner, as no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. My grandma invited the man to sit with us. I could tell my mom wasn't comfortable with this as she whispered stuff in my dad's ear. Too late now though, the man was already seated at the table. Good thing I didn't sit next to him because I could smell his clothes from across the table. I didn't understand what my dad was thinking with this. When all the food was finally on the table, everyone sat down and we did our prayer. My brother and grandma attempted to hold hands with Stefan, but he didn't grab their hands back. I low-key watched him as we all prayed, and he just sat there, his eyes bulgingly wide, his mouth not moving. He just sat there like he didn't want to be there. After the prayer, we all began to eat, and at least 3 of my family members tried talking to him at some point. He didn't seem friendly at all though. His responses were very dry and one-wordish. It made the dinner a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what my dad saw in this man or why he felt comfortable bringing him into our home. I get trying to help the needy, but there was another way to do it than this. He helped himself to some food, but even the way he ate was really messy. Like his fingers were really greasy, some food got in his hair. It wasn't pleasant to watch. Now you may think I'm just trash-talking a homeless person, so let's move past that. Eventually Stefan said, "Excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom." My dad pointed him in the direction of the bathroom, which was down the half flight of stairs down the hall to the left. He got up, not saying thank you, and followed the directions. Once we were sure he was out of earshot, my mom and grandparents started asking questions like what the hell is wrong with my dad bringing that man in here? My dad whispered that he felt terrible and wanted to do something right. My mom questioned how we were going to get him out of here now. My dad insisted that we were being good people though, and that we'd agree eventually. We continued eating, till my brother asked, "Where is he? He's been gone a while." We all agreed it was strange, so my dad went down the stairs to the bathroom to look. He came back up a few seconds later saying he wasn't in the bathroom. My grandma's looked very distressed as my grandpa started cursing in Italian. My brother, my dad, and I started checking the whole apartment. My dad was calling Stefan's name the whole time. We checked all the bedrooms, all the closets. Somehow he wasn't anywhere. However, the window in my parents' room was open, enough for someone to climb through, so we assumed the obvious. My mom came in yelling at my dad that this is what happens for him being stupid and letting a potentially dangerous person into our home. We all had to agree, sadly. My dad closed the window, and we tried to go about the rest of our dinner normally. But of course, the whole time we talked about the bizarre encounter. After dinner, we had dessert. Then eventually my grandparents left. The four of us cleaned up the table and dishes, and a couple hours later, everyone dispersed to their rooms for bed. I'm being very loose with the time frame because this was almost a year ago, but I believe it was another hour later that I finally turned off my TV for bed. The silence in the room allowed me to hear it. The breathing. I heard it in my room. Not my breathing. I was frozen stiff. I didn't even want to move or sit up. I didn't know where exactly in the room it was coming from. I just looked for the door to my room, trying to sum up the courage to run. I heard the faintest shuffling sounds, like of the fabric of a jacket, and I heard, almost in my ear, shh, and a hand pressed down on my neck. That's when the scream I'd been building up exploded out of my mouth as I literally sprang out from the bed and into the hall, calling for my dad. Everyone came out from their rooms and looked down the hall toward my room when I said Stefan's in there. Shockingly, Stefan stepped out from my room, looked at us, and walked out the front door as my dad yelled at him to get out, of course without getting physical because he's a big softie. Stefan was long gone by the time police finally showed up. The police said the important thing was that he left and none of us were hurt, and now just to make sure to lock the door and windows. They took our description of Stefan and they left. I like to think my dad learned his lesson from that. You can't trust everyone you meet. For Black Friday a few years ago, I went to Best Buy. Well, technically it was midnight the night before Black Friday. My local Best Buy is always open late the night before Black Friday. I went with my best friend Taylor to look for a new laptop and maybe whatever other stuff caught my eye. We split off to look for our own things. While browsing the laptop section, someone in a blue Best Buy shirt approached me asking if I needed help. I gave him specific specs I was interested in, and he started looking around with me. He showed me one laptop he claimed he really liked, then asked me what it was I'd be doing with the laptop. I found it to be a slightly odd question, but maybe it was part of his sales pitch. I said just for school and general web browsing kind of deal. After this point though, he seemed more interested in me rather than helping me. Like he was asking a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from, where I go to school, etc. I don't want to sound self-absorbed, but I do get a decent amount of male attraction when I go out. Anyway, I started realizing he seemed to be hitting on me, and I found him overall creepy, so I reminded him politely about the laptop and that I was in a hurry. He was relentless though. He actually asked for my phone number after that. I made it clear to him I was uninterested. Luckily I locked eyes with Taylor, who happened to be walking over, and I mouthed the word help to her. She understood, and she came over and called my name, saying, "Come and hurry." I said, "Sorry, I have to go," to the creepy guy, and followed Taylor away. We walked to the other side of the store. I told her I didn't want to see that guy again. He was obsessive and creepy and didn't get the hints. We left the store after that with plans of going shopping elsewhere tomorrow. We were both starving though, so we went to the nearby diner, which is open 24/7. We sat at a booth and looked at the menu. The place was practically empty at this hour, except for a lone man sitting at the bar, seemingly looking at the menu as well. His back was to me. I didn't notice him there 5 minutes earlier. He was in a gray jacket, but I recognized his hair. I whispered to Taylor to look at him. As we looked at him, he tried to subtly turn to look at us, but when he realized we were already staring, he looked away. It was him, the Best Buy worker. "Oh my God, he followed us," I whispered. "Let's go," I said, and we got up and left the diner. We hurried to my car and I drove us home to my house as fast as I could. Taylor was sleeping over that night. To put it short, eventually there were 3 slow knocks on the living room window. We both shrieked and didn't know what to do. "My apartment is on the bottom floor." "It's him," we kept saying. We went to the window, but oddly couldn't see outside, like total blackness. The view of outside was blocked. We were too creeped out. We had to call the cops. When we got a knock on the door from police, we immediately felt safer. So it turned out the reason we couldn't see out the window is because a shirt was hung over the window, blocking view in or outside. Not just any shirt, a blue Best Buy shirt. Pinned to the shirt was a post-it note that said, "I don't work at Best Buy, bitch." So the police recommended I file a harassment charge. But the problem was I didn't know his name or who it was. They said I could get a lawyer and get the surveillance footage from Best Buy to find the guy, but it sounded like a lot of work. I let it go, but I stayed at Taylor's apartment for a few days. I still can't believe that guy followed us all the way to my house. Some people are dangerously crazy. My friend Carlos and I would always go out shoveling people's sidewalks after big snowstorms to make some quick cash. In like 2013 or 2014, our town was in the midst of a blizzard. It was dark, windy, and snow was building up fast. Our school already announced it would be closed due to snow the next day. So with nothing to do that night, and it being only like 8 p.m., we went out with our shovels and started ringing doorbells offering to shovel sidewalks for cash. We got a lot of no's before we got our first yes. We made around $15 each on our first house. We made our way across the neighborhood. A lot of people weren't interested, and most people just wouldn't open their doors. We got a second house eventually, and made a little more money on that one. Then I remember a long gap between that house and the next house that would say yes. It was a small corner house, but usually corner houses would pay more. We rang the bell, and the door cracked open, but whoever was on the other side didn't show their face. They did, however, speak from the other side. A deep man's voice said, "Who's there?" I pitched our snow shoveling service to the man on the other side, requesting $40 in return since it was a corner house. There was a short silence. Then the voice on the other side said, "Oh yes, please, $40 is fine." There was a hint of nervousness in the voice. I said all right, and then the door shut. I didn't see the man's face at all. I turned to Carlos and said that was weird, but we started the shoveling. I started from the front porch down the walkway to the driveway. Carlos worked on the sidewalks. I couldn't help but stare at the house every once in a while, and at one point when I turned to a window as I was throwing the snow from my shovel onto the ground, I saw who I assumed to be the homeowner. He was standing at one of the windows watching me. Could I see anything of his face? Not really. He was standing in a dark room. A little uncomfortable it made me, but I tried my best to ignore it and continue shoveling. Of course, I'd occasionally glance back and he would still be there. Eventually I finished the driveway, just around the same time Carlos finished the sidewalks. So we started our way back up the walkway to the front stoop. But before getting to the stoop, the door opened and the man inside shouted, "Go around back." Carlos and I froze, looked at each other, then obeyed his command. We stepped through the snow-covered grass to the backyard gate. I opened it and pushed it through the rising snow, which was slightly difficult. Then, there we were, in the man's backyard, which had a small awning that we stayed under to get out from the falling snow. We waited by the back door, expecting him to come outside eventually with our money. We waited for over a minute and started getting antsy. I started pounding on the back door since there didn't seem to be a doorbell. Then there was the sound of a window being rotated open, followed by the man's voice again, saying, "Come inside." Carlos and I looked at each other again, and then I led the way in through the back door. All the lights in this house were turned off. It was actually so hard to see anything, really. "Hello?" I said. I heard a man's voice from another room call, "I'm counting your money on the table." It seemed he was inside the kitchen, which was connected by a small door through the room we entered from. We walked closer to the kitchen, which appeared to be lit up through the window only by the streetlight standing on the side of the house. I stood at the doorway, intending on looking through the crack of the door to see where the guy was standing in the kitchen, but I couldn't see through the crack because it was blocked by him. The man was standing on the other side of the door, looking through the crack. I turned and pretended I didn't see him. I made up some bull, like telling Carlos we forgot something outside. We left the house, and the man didn't say a word. As soon as we got outside, we grabbed our shovels and sprinted away from there. All of our hard work shoveling that house was for nothing. We got back to my backyard, put the shovels away, and went inside to warm up and rest for a little bit. Carlos and I chilled for a little bit, then it was time for him to go. He went out the back to get his shovel, but he came back inside, concerned, telling me to come take a look at something. There was an extra, fresh set of boot marks in the snow. You may ask how we knew. That's because one set trailed from the gate to the back door to the shed in the corner of our backyard. Carlos hurried back inside, and we told my mom. We live in a very poor, relatively unsafe neighborhood, so my mom was quick to believe us and get 911 on the phone. Police showed up relatively quickly considering the horrible driving conditions, and they went to investigate the shed. Carlos, my mom, and I watched through the back window as the police pulled out a man from the shed. He had a matching shirt from what I could see through the window back when we were shoveling that property. It was undoubtedly the house owner. He later admitted to police that he was going to attempt to break into the house when we all went to sleep. Why, however, he never answered. Police also said he was very intoxicated when he admitted this, which made me think, what on earth was he going to do to us in that kitchen if we didn't leave his house? It was an early December night, and we were having our first snowstorm of the year. I was in my bed watching some low-budget Christmas film while texting various friends, mostly my friends George and Pat. We used to text in a 3-person group chat. Everything was as it should be when I felt my heart drop to my stomach as a bang came from the window right next to my bed. I opened the curtain, but there was no one standing out there. Then, pow, there was another, as I was still looking out the window. It was a snowball. Someone was throwing snowballs at my window. I stood on my bed to get the best possible view out the window, but I didn't see anyone standing out there in the snow. So I actually lifted open my window to call out. It was almost immediately after I shouted out the window that I heard someone's laughter. Not a child's laughter like I was expecting it to be. It was a deeper voice, could belong to anyone from the age of 17 to 40 for all I knew. I shut the window and started texting in our little group chat saying I knew it was one of them messing with me. The fact that they now weren't responding made me even more confident. I didn't close the curtain as I knew whichever one of them it was, they weren't done messing with me. And just like that, another snowball hit my window. I lifted the window up quickly to try and catch them. And there he was, standing in the snow, waving to me. But it wasn't either of my friends. It was some guy in a black beanie and black coat with gloves on, laughing. He started approaching the window. I hurried and slammed it shut and twisted the little lock. I also closed the curtain so that he couldn't look into my room. Both of my friends had texted back by now with question mark responses. Then there was a single knock at my window, and it started being fiddled with and shaken. He was trying to lift it open. When it all stopped, I waited a couple minutes before peeking through the curtain. It seemed the coast was clear, so I finally went to go tell my mom and dad about the whole thing, who came to have a look out my window. Sure, my dad believed me, he literally saw the footprints in the snow, but he just didn't see it necessary to call the police, figuring whoever was out there gave up. My dad turned on all the outside lights just as a deterrent, and then they went to sleep. I stayed up in my room with the lights off, continuing to watch movies. My door clicked open. I said get out, assuming it was my little brother. The door shut, so it seemed he listened to me. Silence, except for the TV. I watched for a long while, then a click in my wood floor. I turned, halfway through repeating get out in a louder voice, when realizing it was not my short little brother. It was that tall man in the black beanie and coat from outside. He started waving to me again at the doorway, then put his pointer finger up to his lips. He started walking over to my bed, and that's when I got up, ready to defend myself. He approached faster now, easily grabbed me, and covered my mouth with his leather gloves. There was a wet white towel in his glove that he was pressing to my face for a long time. I tried to break free and scream, but I couldn't, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went black. I woke up in my living room with my parents and police hovering over me. An ambulance arrived shortly. My dad heard the commotion going on in my room and came to find the man over me. My dad, much larger than that man, managed to overpower him, but not long enough before the police could arrive. He ran out the front door and disappeared. I was quickly brought to the hospital. Thankfully, I was all right. If you're wondering, the man climbed in through our downstairs window. It's a little-known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold, sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard. After a full, rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares, I was way too far and disoriented to make my way back to my cabin. I had to seek refuge somewhere else. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees. No lights on, but I still had to try the door. I hit the door with my fist a few times. No answer, but I could hear footsteps on the other side, approaching the door. I expected it to open, but it didn't. I shouted that I'm lost and need shelter. The door cracked open, and I heard a voice say, "Come in, leave your boots by the door." I waited a bit, expecting him to open the door fully and formally greet me as anyone would, but that didn't happen. So I pushed the door open myself and entered the dark cabin. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch that the man then told me to sleep on. As for the man, all I saw was his silhouette on the far side of the room. The little light from the candles didn't extend that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and laid down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me crash here till the storm blows over. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the most bizarre thing. Folks are strange up in the mountains. If he wasn't up for conversation, I'd just get some early shut-eye. I closed my eyes, though the level of darkness with my eyes closed wasn't much of a difference. I was subconsciously waiting to hear the man's footsteps leave the room, but they never did. I opened my eyes, and his silhouette was still in the corner of the room, just standing there. I felt the need to say, "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna get some sleep now, thanks." No response. I turned to my other side so that I wouldn't be tempted to just keep opening my eyes to check on him. Some time passed, but without having heard his footsteps walk away, the curiosity was eating away at me. I turned over to look again, and this time, I swear to God, the silhouette of the man was closer by at least a few feet. I couldn't make out his face, but the slight glow from the candles would just barely trickle around the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my belongings and thanked him, but I said I had to go. I didn't look at him anymore, because I don't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the blizzard. I came across another cabin down the hill, this one with the lights on. I knocked on the door, and some old man and his wife answered the door. They welcomed me in immediately and were very inviting. They gave me some hot tea and offered me a spot on the couch. I told them my story about the freaky cabin up the hill, and the two looked at each other, puzzled. The woman confirmed 2 times the cabin I was talking about. Then she said, "Honey, the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. That cabin has been vacant ever since." September 24th, 1971 was the last day at the time 16-year-old Kathy Marie Moulton was seen. Kathy planned to attend a dance during that night in her hometown of Portland, Maine. She asked her father to drop her off on Cumberland Avenue that evening. Kathy wanted to purchase a pair of pantyhose and some toothpaste before preparing for the dance. She stopped by a music store on Forest Avenue later in the day to visit a friend. She told her friend she would see her at the dance that evening, and then said she was going to walk home, which was about 1.5 miles away. She was last seen walking down Forest Avenue after leaving the music store, and she was seen carrying a brown leather Mexican clutch purse, which contained her house key, 2 tubes of toothpaste, and a very small amount of cash. When she didn't arrive home by dinner time, her parents knew something was wrong and reported her missing. Kathy was seen in a stolen blue Cadillac with her friend named Lester Everett, though it is possible that Kathy willingly left with him. There were reported sightings of Kathy, Lester, and another young man in a remote area of Aroostook County a few weeks after her disappearance. The second young man was Ronald Reed Purley. However, Lester was eventually found alone, and he claimed to not know where Kathy was. A garage employee at Fort Fairfield in Aroostook County remembered seeing Kathy, Lester, and Ronald. They came to the garage to buy new tires for the Cadillac. The employees said Ronald appeared to be controlling Kathy's movements, even walking her to and from the bathroom with his hand on the back of her neck. Across the border on the Tobique Reserve, witnesses said they saw Lester and Kathy for a few days in September 1971, before the two went to a farm in the Mars Hill area of Aroostook County where they started working on a potato field at McBride's farm. Kathy was completely distrusting of Lester and continually begged to go back home to Portland, which he refused. Kathy befriended a teenage girl who worked on the fields. The girl said Kathy was nervous about her parents being upset with her, and that they were probably looking for her. According to the girl, Kathy also cried often and seemed fearful of the other men working on the farm, and she often said she wanted to go home. Lester became tired of Kathy's constant complaining to go home, so on the evening of September 29, 1971, while the other field workers were enjoying a bonfire, Lester got behind the wheel of the stolen car with Kathy in the passenger seat, and he told her that they were going for a ride. She begged him to drive her back home, but he didn't. Lester returned the next morning and said that he had dropped her off at another camp, when in reality, he had brought her back across the Canadian border to the Tobique Reserve and left her with Ronald. At the end of the potato harvest, Lester and a few others left for Florida to pick oranges. He never returned to Maine, and when questioned, he said he did not know what happened to Kathy. Lester died of cancer in the mid-1980s, at the age of 35. Ronald, who had served time for rape and home invasion, has long been a prime suspect in this investigation. He has refused to cooperate with police, even when he was offered immunity from prosecution if he would provide details as to what happened to Kathy. Investigators have considered the possibility that Kathy was killed by Lester and that he left her body in the woods of Aroostook County. But this theory is unlikely, since some of Ronald's relatives would later verify the fact that Lester had dropped her off at their home, and they would claim that one of their relatives had harmed her. It's unknown if this is what happened. His family has refused to cooperate with police about Kathy as well. Investigators believe she died on the Tobique Reserve sometime before Thanksgiving of 1971, but they never had enough evidence to file charges against anybody, or even get warrants to search Ronald's family home. In 1983, a hunter said he came across a skeleton in the woods near Smyrna, Maine, surrounded by female clothing. Some investigators believe the remains were Kathy's. The hunter was unable to retrace his footsteps and lead police back to the site, however, and the bones were never seen again. Kathy was a junior at Deering High School at the time of her disappearance, and her peers said she seemed like a happy girl with no reason to run away from home. Her father died in 2017, but her mother is still alive and continues to hope for a resolution in her case. Mary Virginia Carpenter was a 21-year-old girl from Texarkana, Texas, who went missing in Denton in the summer of 1948. She was last seen by a taxi driver around 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 1st, 1948. She left her home in Texarkana and took a train to Denton, 6 hours away. At the station, she took a taxi to the Texas Women's University, where she was planning to complete a summer term. She transferred from the University of Arkansas after she decided she wanted to enter a different career field. Mary first enrolled in the Texas Women's University during the 1945 to 1946 school year, and then took a break from school to help her mother who had fallen ill and to save money. Mary once again enrolled in the school for the 1948 summer term, where she planned to begin training as a laboratory technician in the autumn, but she disappeared just before the summer term began. The cab driver who had seen her last, Edgar Ray Zachary, later stated he stopped in front of Brackenridge Hall, a building on campus, at 9 p.m., and Mary gave him a ticket for her trunk and paid him $1 so he would pick it up for her from the train station the next day. Edgar stated that after she got out of the taxi, Mary approached two young men standing near a yellow convertible that he believed to be a Pontiac. Edgar stated that one of the men were tall and the other one was chunky. Mary approached the men as if she knew them and began to speak to them, and Edgar, assuming they were just her friends, drove away. She never checked into her dorm in Brackenridge Hall and was never seen or heard from again after this moment. Some of Mary's former boyfriends stated she became infatuated easily and speculated that she ran away with a lover, but her family did not believe that she would leave without telling them, as Mary was very close with her family and it would just be completely out of character. She had previously been engaged, but broke off the relationship just weeks prior to the wedding. Police zeroed in on her boyfriend Kenny Branham and the cab driver Edgar. Kenny passed the polygraph tests and insisted that Mary would have no reason to run away. She didn't have a lover coaxing her to run off, no jealous exes, no wishes to leave her life behind. Kenny was also the first to report Mary missing to her mother, making his involvement unlikely. On top of that, Mary was looking forward to starting her semester at college. This led investigators to conclude that she had been taken. Police shifted their attention to Edgar and learned he had a record for petty crimes and a reputation for being abusive. He was charged with attempted rape in 1957, but the charge was dropped after the victim asked authorities not to prosecute. Edgar's wife stated he had been home with her from 10 p.m. onwards on the day Mary disappeared, but 10 years after her disappearance, his wife told police she lied to them, and her husband had not actually arrived home until 2 or 3 a.m. that night. Edgar died in 1984. He was never charged in connection with Mary's case, but he remains a suspect, although he did pass 2 polygraph tests in her case. In the winter and spring of 1946, 5 people were murdered in Lover's Lanes in Mary's hometown of Texarkana. A Lover's Lane is a secluded area where people kiss or engage in sexual activity in their vehicles. This meant all 5 victims were young, around Mary's age. The crimes are believed to have all been committed by the same person. The murderer was never caught and became known as the Texarkana Phantom Killer. Mary was actually well acquainted with 3 of the killer's victims, creating suspicion that her case was linked with these murders, but police found no evidence to support this theory. In 1998, police received a tip that 2 men had raped and killed Mary shortly after her disappearance and buried her body in a dam at a stock tank near the Texas Women's University campus. The suspects were both deceased by this time, however. Police investigated this dam based on the information, but uncovered no evidence. Numerous leads and possible sightings of Mary have surfaced throughout the decades, but no solid evidence has been uncovered. Both of Mary's parents have passed away, and she was an only child, but her 3 cousins still hope to find closure in this case one day. Like Mary, Army veteran Alvin Matlock was also 21 years old at the time that he went missing in the spring of 1951. There were a lot of theories as to what happened to him, but none of them were pleasant. Alvin was last seen in Spokane, Washington, and at the time of his disappearance, he lived in a cabin on Browns Mountain in Spokane County. His little brother Clyde, who was 12 years old when Alvin disappeared, is now 83, and to this day still hopes his brother's body is found. Clyde and his wife Patricia went to the inaugural missing person event hosted by the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Office in 2016. At this event, which was held to help facilitate locating missing people, attendees could file police reports, submit DNA and dental records, and provide photographs of loved ones. Alvin had spoken to family members in March and informed them of his cabin's location. As far as his disappearance, his family first suspected something wasn't right when Alvin didn't show up to the family dinner on Thanksgiving Day 1951. His worried mother drove to his cabin on Brown Mountain to find the cabin empty and both of his vehicles gone. The family was told by a neighbor that he had quietly packed up and gone to Alaska. Clyde and other family members believed this for a while, mostly because they wanted to. But as the years passed and there was no contact from Alvin, it became clear he was not in Alaska. The story going around was that Alvin was having an affair with a married woman and had got into a fight with the woman's husband when he found out about what was going on. Some people believe that the woman shot Alvin during the scuffle, with reports from alleged neighbors saying they heard his cries for help and that the couple just likely let him die, but there was no body ever found. Police investigated these claims, but with no body, they couldn't make any arrests. There are no records of Alvin ever having lived in Alaska. However, according to family, Alvin was a loner and a big outdoorsman, and him moving to Alaska wouldn't be that far-fetched, especially since life in Alaska wouldn't really be that far off from the lifestyle that he was living in his cabin on Browns Mountain. Still, with no records of Alvin living in Alaska, and the complete cease of contact from Alvin's end, it still just doesn't add up, and some suspicion was also placed on the neighbor, who reported that he moved to Alaska. Patricia Matlock had done some detective work of her own, trying to find new leads and track down possible witnesses, but it was all to no avail. During the missing person event back in 2016, all Clyde could do was hand over some photographs of his brother and provide his DNA, in the hopes that someday, his brother's remains would be found and identified. I started talking to this girl years back named Christina. We met through mutual friends, and after a while of commenting on each other's Snapchat stories, I decided to just bite the bullet and ask her out on a date. It was mid-July, so options for things to do were abundant. Namely, the beach and anything outdoors was an option for a first date. There's a beach by me that allows trucks to drive onto it with proper permits, and I frequently go there still to this day with my pickup truck. It was a night that neither of us had work the next day, so we decided to go to the beach and have a little bonfire with some drinks. On a weeknight past 8 o'clock, I knew next to nobody else would be on the beach that late, so it was what seemed like a perfect first date in privacy. She lived only 5 minutes away from me, so I picked her up, and then we stopped at a 7-Eleven where I bought some firewood and other supplies for the fire. Then we headed straight to the beach. To be honest, I'd never started a fire before that, so I was scared of embarrassing myself, but on paper, it sounded like a good idea. I pulled us onto the trail that leads to the beach. It's a decently long trail, and at one point there's a fork in the path where 99% of people turn right to the main beach, but I often go left because it's a lesser known, smaller but more private section of beach. We went left, and when we got to the beach section, we were the only people there. I had my brights on and could see basically all the way down the empty beach. Not another truck in sight. I pulled my truck up on a sandhill, then parked it, and we started to unload the truck. I dug a hole with my shovel to place the firewood and some smaller fire-catching sticks, and honestly, I couldn't get a fire to catch. I tried for 20 minutes and couldn't do it, and I called it quits. It was embarrassing, but we laughed about it, so we just chilled in the dark for a little bit, drinking the beers we brought. For a while, all we heard was the waves hitting the beach, but Christina was the first to point out that she heard something else in a whisper. I started to listen closer, shifting all my attention to that, and I heard what she meant. It was this whistling sound. Not like a bird, it was a person for sure. Christina and I looked at each other with telling faces of how freaked out we were. The whistling was extremely close. Since we had no other light, I went into my truck and turned on the headlights, and I heard Christina scream. We both saw the back of a man's head hurrying out of the tall beach grass on the little hill of sand above my truck. He had likely been there the whole time, watching us for some reason. I yelled to get lost to the creep. I went up the little hill and tried to follow him, but right away I lost sight of him. There was tall beach grass everywhere. He could have been hiding in any of it. I took out my phone to use its flashlight and got on my toes to get a look over the grass. Looking back, I don't even think I wanted to find him, so I don't know why I didn't just get in the car right away and leave. Christina called me back to just get in the car and leave. Then I heard the whistle again. It sounded way too close for comfort, like within 10 feet from me. Christina heard it too, and she once again begged me to come back to the car. I did. I went back down the little hill and started packing the chairs and bags into the bed of my truck. As I was getting into the truck, I stopped and heard a humming from the same spot. It was clear by this point someone was deliberately trying to scare us. We got in the car, and I switched my lights off and turned the engine on. I sat there for a few moments, waiting, as if I knew that whoever was in the grass would come look at us after hearing the engine start and lights turn off. And I was right. I turned my lights back on and for just a brief moment, a man's face could be seen looking through the grass into my truck. The light being turned back on made him hide back in the grass. I was tempted to get out and beat the guy up, but Christina stopped me and convinced me that he may be sick in the head or armed, or both, and that we should just leave. I agreed, and we left the beach, the whole time looking behind us to make sure we weren't being followed. It was an incredibly tense and scary drive off that beach. With the amount of crazy people out there, I have no idea what that man's intentions were, but nothing about that entire encounter was normal at all. When I was younger, my family rented a beach house for a weekend one summer. The house rental was cut extremely short, and this is why. It was our first day there. We went to the beach and then went out to eat for dinner. The sand dunes were very hilly near the house, and that night, my brother Joey and I came up with the idea of sand sledding down the hills. We found a couple big cardboard boxes in one of the closets in the house, so we cut pieces off the boxes to use as sleds. Our parents didn't mind us going out in the dark as long as we wouldn't stray too far away from the house. We found what seemed to be the tallest part of the sandhill and started riding down the pieces of cardboard box as if they were sleds. It worked pretty well, actually. When Joey made it to the bottom, I'd say his third or fourth time, he called up to me, "Tyler, what is that?" I didn't see what he meant, so I slid down the hill again and looked at what he was pointing at. It was something in the ocean. It was this black object sticking out from the water. The moon's reflection on the ocean was just enough to see this object, but not know what it is. It looked like something was definitely floating in the water, though. We were a little freaked out and were too scared to go closer and look at what it was, so we walked a little further down the beach to look for a different hill. We found one that wasn't as tall, but it was still near enough to the house. My brother slid down the hill first. I stood at the top watching. I looked out to the ocean again, and I saw that black object in the water again. It's as if we didn't even move, or as if it followed us. I yelled at Joey to look at the ocean again. He looked and probably saw it right away, because he ran up the hill to me freaked out. We were discussing what we thought the thing could be. Maybe we didn't move as much as we thought we did. We stared at the object for a while, and we could see it was bopping around a bit. We looked down the beach at the house we were staying at. It wasn't too far away, so we decided to get a closer look at this floating object. We thought maybe it was a dead animal floating in the water. We couldn't have been more wrong. As we got maybe halfway to the water, the black object floating around bopping in the water started to rise, and we realized it wasn't floating at all. A person's body was revealed as they stood up at a towering height, arms now flat at their sides. It was a person's head this whole time. We ran to the house and slammed the door behind us, yelling to our parents. Our parents seemed confident that there was no threat from someone going for a night swim, though, even after we said they were following us in the water. Our dad went out to the backyard deck with the lights on and looked around the beach, and when he didn't see anyone, he told us we had nothing to worry about. It wasn't until later that night that we heard our mom scream from the living room as Joey and I were in the room we were sharing. We jumped out of our beds to rush outside and see what it was. As we entered the living room, our dad yelled at us to go back to our room, but we didn't listen right away. They were looking at something outside. We walked over to see what it was they were staring at. Close enough to see him, a naked, smiling man on the backyard deck, waving. My dad then physically moved us back into our bedroom and told us not to come out. We heard everything, as our dad was screaming threats of calling the police at the man. Then there was a loud bang from the glass of the back door, accompanied with the sound of our mom screaming. Our dad yelled at our mom to go stay with the kids. She came into the room and tried to comfort us, while we heard our dad calling 911, all while hearing periodic bangs on the glass. Our dad is not a big guy, and he's far from a fighter, so the chances of him going outside to confront that man himself were slim to none unless it was absolutely necessary. This went on for a few minutes before the bangs stopped and our dad seemed calmer. A bunch of police cars came to the house. There were more police officers in the house than I can remember counting. My brother and I were asked to describe what we saw on the beach to help tie the whole story together. Our parents to this day tell us that the most likely explanation was a child predator on drugs. It was a very sick and disturbing thing for our entire family to go through. In fact, 12 years later, it's still cringy and disturbing to think back on. And yes, the obvious answer to the obvious question, did we leave after that encounter? Yes, we did. And our parents got their money back. We ended up staying at a nearby resort so as not to waste the weekend. But obviously, we were all a bit shaken up after that. I was 20, my girlfriend Stevie and I wanted to go to this local beach fireworks show for the 4th of July. However, all the main beach parking lots were completely full, and it was absolute chaos trying to find parking. Eventually, we ended up driving further down the road to a less crowded, almost empty parking lot. People were parked in the lot sitting on beach chairs in the parking lot, apparently ready to watch the show from there, but Stevie and I didn't want to do that. We walked onto the beach with our blanket and drinks. We had to cross a tunnel under the overpass to get to the beach side away from the parking lot. The beach was surprisingly empty. Apparently, we were the only ones who thought it'd be a good idea to walk to the main beach. We started our long walk. We walked for literally 20 minutes until the fireworks started shooting into the air. We weren't that close, but it was better than nothing, and we were tired from walking. We had the beach to ourselves where we laid down the blanket. We were literally just making the best of the situation. The fireworks show was decently long. About 10 minutes into the show, I heard voices from behind us. I turned around and saw a few people in the distance. They were standing facing the fireworks. Nothing strange there, probably just more people watching the fireworks show. We sat for another 10 minutes or so, around the time the show ended. We were being eaten alive by mosquitoes by that point, so we picked all our stuff up and started speed walking back. We passed a few tunnels, and although they all looked the same, we remembered that the one we crossed had 2 garbage cans right next to the left wall. I could see a young man approaching us from the darkness ahead. He greeted us and asked us for help. I slowed my walk, but didn't come to a complete halt, because I was instantly wary of this guy. He looked to be one of the guys I had seen in the distance earlier. He was pointing into the tunnel next to him, saying his friend was injured and he needed help, but that he didn't have a phone on him. Stevie seemed equally sketched out as me. I continued to inch away from the guy while holding her, gauging this young Hispanic man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. I asked him where his friend was, and he said in the parking lot beyond the tunnel. I looked into the tunnel, which was completely pitch black. There was no way in hell I was going through there. This seemed incredibly off. I apologized and said we're in a hurry, and pulled Stevie along with me as we continued to walk quickly away. The man's tone changed to more annoyed, angry. He called me a piece of shit as we walked away. I didn't even turn around to acknowledge. I just whispered to Stevie to keep walking. I'd look over my shoulder every few seconds, checking if we were being followed by him, and eventually I realized we were. He, along with 2 other people, were tailing us from not far behind, already indicating that the man lied about his so-called injured friend. We were about to be jumped, I could feel it. I told Stevie to run ahead to the tunnel with the 2 garbage cans. I knew if we both ran, that it would probably trigger the group of men behind us to chase us. She moved ahead in a low-key, non-obvious jog. I realized the men behind me were getting closer. I wanted to give Stevie a little more time to get ahead to the car before I would book it. By the time I'd made it to the tunnel, I turned around again, and the 3 men were almost right on top of me now. One of them started shouting, "Hey, come here." Stevie was trying to call me, but I couldn't pick up. As soon as I got to the entrance of the tunnel, I felt that they were about to run up to me and grab me, so I booked it through the tunnel, and I heard their footsteps right behind me. I sprinted on the concrete while barefoot, but I endured the pain in the heat of the moment, in fear for my life. I made it through the tunnel to the parking lot, which was lit up by streetlights, thank God, and somewhere in the tunnel, the 3 men stopped chasing me. The parking lot was now empty besides 2 other cars, and my car, which Stevie was already in with the lights on. I ran to get in the car, and I looked back one final time to the tunnel, and saw 2 of the 3 guys standing probably 10 feet into the tunnel, watching. I got in the car, and we drove out of the parking lot and down the parkway, and honestly, I was never so relieved to see the taillights of a traffic jam from the thousands of people leaving the main beach parking lots. I have no clue if we were going to be mugged or murdered, but clearly those people were there that night with a plan. I'm glad we didn't fall for their trap. House sitting for my grandma one weekend while she went to Florida with some of her church friends. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom next to her room. The guest bedroom always had 2 twin beds inside of it that my brother and I would sleep in when we had sleepovers at her house. I took the bed next to the window, but before getting into bed, I checked all the doors, making sure they were locked. When I did get into bed, it was early, and I didn't actually go to sleep for a while. There wasn't much to do at my grandma's house. I was just on my phone for an hour or two, watching videos, texting people, whatever. That's when I thought I could start hearing someone's voice outside. It sounded like a woman's voice, saying hello. I left the bedroom and inched my way closer to the front door, moving slow because I was trying to listen.
Hello?
It was a woman's voice, just going hello like every 10 seconds. As I got closer to the front door, I realized that's where it seemed to be coming from. My grandma's door doesn't have a peephole, but the windows in her dining room gave a clear view of the front porch, so I went over to that window to attempt to get a view of who was out there. I tried peeking my head in between the plastic blinds without making it obvious, but I guess I didn't do a good job of that, because when I looked, I did see a woman on my grandma's stoop, and she was looking right at me, as if she knew I was going to be looking through those blinds. Once again, she said hello, with some freakish smile on her face. This woman was older, but don't picture her as some innocent-looking, small old lady. She looked like she was maybe late 50s, early 60s, and something about her face just skeeved me out. I moved away from the window and thought maybe it was one of my grandma's friends. It was midnight, though. Why would anyone come to the door this late? And why wouldn't she knock or ring the bell? Why was she just standing out there going hello over and over? I was genuinely unsettled. I just went back to the guest bedroom and shut the door. Now with the door shut as opposed to before, I couldn't hear that woman anymore. Maybe it was that, or she just decided to leave. I started texting everyone about it, my sisters, my friends, telling them how bizarre it was. But a good amount of time passed in silence, and I was starting to calm down. My sisters were telling me to call Grandma, but there was a 0% chance she was awake, and she barely ever even checked her cell phone anyway. Just like that, something broke the silence. A banging at the window. Not a knocking or tapping, banging. I felt that fierce pain in my chest area as my body entered that fight or flight mode. Shortly after the banging stopped, I heard that familiar voice say hello. With that boost of adrenaline, I guess I had the extra confidence to grab the blind and push it up. There I was, face to face with this horrifying older lady, with only a thin layer of glass between us. I screamed at her smiling, gross face, "I'm calling the cops." I pulled the blind back down and ran back outside to the living room. I looked around the house, then ran upstairs to box myself into the upstairs guest bedroom. I didn't want to actually call the cops. I don't know why. I wanted to just wait it out. I crawled into the bed in the upstairs guest bedroom and tucked myself under the covers. A couple hours later, I was still awake, and I finally only then went back downstairs to look outside each window. That freaky old lady seemed to be gone. The next morning, I called my grandma and told her what happened. She started yelling into the phone, clearly panicking and distressed. She told me how a few days earlier, she was being watched in the grocery store by some woman about 10 years younger than her, who just kept smiling at her for no reason. I told her to calm down. I didn't entirely know whether to correlate the two or not, but when we eventually got off the phone with each other, I did have to give it a second thought. My grandma is 75, and she has lost a bit of her wits, so I do have to take some of the things she says with a grain of salt. But the way she yelled into the phone about the woman in the store really gave me the chills, and I still wonder if it could have been the same person. My name is Nicholas. I'm currently a freshman at Syracuse University, which doesn't exactly sit in the safest area. I just went through a breakup with my first girlfriend, so I started getting back into the online dating scene. I was using the app Hinge when I found some blonde girl named Stephanie who I really connected with. She also went to Syracuse. We both liked to read, go to the movies, we even had the same sense of humor. I suggested we go on a movie date, and she said she'd love to. She told me to meet her at some specific point near campus and she'd pick me up. So, around 9 o'clock, I waited on some corner of a normal neighborhood block, waiting for Stephanie. She asked me to share my location with her, and so I did. A few minutes later, I saw a car turn down the street and start approaching me. Then it stopped in front of me, and the driver rolled down the window. It wasn't Stephanie, though, but some old random guy. He asked what I was doing alone out here, which was insanely weird, first of all. Then I said I was waiting for someone. He asked if I was waiting for Stephanie, and I said, yeah, how'd you know? He said he was Stephanie's father, and told me to hop in so he could give me a ride to her. I took a good look at him, and he looked a little old to be her father, to be honest. I'm no idiot when it comes to sketchy situations, so I said in a firm voice, why didn't you tell me you'd be picking me up? He claimed he didn't trust a random guy meeting up with his daughter, and wanted to meet me first. I took another good look at the man and didn't say anything. I simply started walking away in the opposite direction from where his car was facing. He started yelling, hey, hey, sounding surprised that I was just walking away like that, but I've heard way too many kidnapping stories to know where this could potentially go. I heard the guy's car moving, and I turned to make sure he wasn't doing a U-turn to follow me. I breathed a sigh of relief when he drove straight and turned left out of sight. I continued walking down the block towards campus. I got to the corner of the block and was just about to make a turn when I noticed what I was pretty sure to be the same car the man was driving, just parked on the side of the road with the light shut off. I briefly tried looking into the window as I passed, but the glass was tinted. I tried not making it obvious that I was suspicious and continued walking. I got a text from this so-called Stephanie person saying, why didn't you get in the car with my dad? I ignored the text and continued walking. I kept looking back to see if the car would move. When I got to an intersection in the road, I turned right and then full-on booked it in the direction of campus. Surprisingly, I wasn't followed. I made it back to campus out of breath and started walking to my dorm building. I felt like I heard footsteps following me, though. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but when I heard a piece of broken glass being kicked by someone's shoe, I knew I was being tailed. I made a point of ducking down behind a van and stopping to give me time to listen for where the footsteps were coming. They were a few cars away from me. Then I remembered. I never stopped sharing my location with Stephanie, or should I say that man. I saw him. It was that old man. He was approaching from between two cars across from me. He yelled something that I didn't fully understand, but it sounded like he said, come back and I'll take you to her. He had to be like 60-something. There's no way he would catch me if I sprinted. I lost him easily when I ran, and made it back to my dorm room. My roommate wasn't there, so I had no one to talk to about it. But when I lay in my bed, I got another text from that man, and it was shocking. It said, you're a little piece of fucking shit. You're lucky you got away. I would have strangled your ugly ass. I still have the screenshot. I replied saying thanks for the threat, it's going straight to the police, and I blocked his number. I still have the conversation saved as evidence, and I plan on going to the police with it eventually. Hopefully they are able to do something about it. When I was 18, I had a side job as a part-time janitor at my high school over the summer. I would work sometimes days and sometimes nights, anywhere from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m., depending on how much money I needed. Oftentimes I would be left to lock up the building when the older janitors have left. This was a time before the high school had cameras installed in every single hallway. So one night, one of my superiors, Tom, had to leave early, meaning I'd be finishing up the rest of my shift alone, and I'd be locking up for the night. He told me text him if I need anything, as he always did, and then he left. I loved it when I was left alone because usually I'd just do half an hour of work and then just hang around on my phone or leave early and still get paid for the whole shift. I definitely pushed it with the things I'd get away with at that place. One of the things Tom asked me to do before leaving was bring all the extra seats in the gymnasium from the assembly down to the basement storage room. So I figured I'd do that, then just go home. I grabbed a stack of 6 chairs and started carrying it down to the basement. The lights in the storage room were very dim. They kind of suck. The whole basement of that school wasn't exactly pretty. It felt more like a basement to a warehouse. Anyway, there were what appeared to be a bunch of art mannequins covered by paint cloths. You know, those big things that look like blankets. It seemed all the school's art supplies were stored down here. I dropped the else should be there. Then I noticed something. The art cloth, tucked in the corner of the storage room, sitting outside of the light that was produced at the center of the room. It was covering something, surely. I started to tiptoe over to it, but when I was a few feet away from it, I realized whatever was under that cloth was moving just ever so slightly. There was undoubtedly someone hiding under there. I ran back upstairs and locked the basement door. I texted Tom saying someone is hiding under a cloth in the basement. He said call the cops, but I insisted he just come back since he only just left like 10 minutes ago. He didn't want to come back though. He told me to be a man and confront whoever was down there. So I went down to the basement again. However, the cloth was now strewn flat on the floor, and whoever was hiding under there was gone. But possibly the scariest thing was yet to happen. As I stood in the storage room, there were loud metallic thumps coming from above my head. I looked up and saw indents slowly forming in the large air vent above me. Someone was crawling through the main vent, then just stopped literally above me. And then bangs. Bangs like whoever was in there was trying to break open the floor of the air vent. I didn't know what was happening, but I was officially done with this. I ran up the stairs, locked up the school, and went home. I told Tom the partial truth the next day, that I thought I saw someone in the corner and it was gone when I went back. And I claimed there was nothing else I could say. Thank God it was my last week there, so it wasn't my concern anymore. Sean Great stalked northern Ohio between 2006 and 2016, slaughtering women after assaulting them. He's now on death row awaiting execution, thanks to one would-be victim's bravery. The following 911 call you're about to hear is of that would-be victim and is possibly one of the most tense 911 calls you'll ever hear. On September 13th, 2016, Ashland police received a phone call from an unknown woman who police referred to as Jane Doe, who whispered that she had been kidnapped and was tied up mere feet away from her sleeping abductor. She tried to describe the man who was holding her captive and the house she was in. The best she could manage was that it was next to the 4th Street laundromat.
911, what is the address to your emergency?
By the 4th Street laundromat.
What is it?
4th Street laundromat.
What's the problem?
I've been abducted.
Who abducted you?
Sean Green.
You said John Green?
Sean Great.
Where's she at now?
Asleep.
Where's she sleeping at?
In the bedroom.
In what bedroom?
There's 2 houses right by the laundry street. And it's in one of those houses.
What color's the house?
Yellow. Please hurry.
Is it an apartment?
No, it's a house.
Okay, does he own the house?
No, he broke into it.
Does anybody actually live there?
I think they've been abandoned.
Does he have a weapon?
He's got a taser.
Are you injured?
A little.
Where did he take you from?
My apartment. I was walking with him.
You were walking with him?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you walking to?
I've known him for like a month and a half.
Is there any way you can get out of the building?
I don't know without waking him, and I'm scared.
Is there a bathroom in the house?
Well, his bedroom is closed, and he made it so it would make noise.
And if you told him you had to go to the bathroom, he would do something to you?
Yeah, because he had me tied up.
So are you tied up now?
Well, yeah, but I kind of freed myself.
Is he in the same room with you?
Yes.
Are you bleeding from anywhere?
Not anymore. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. I woke him up.
I just set the phone down.
While the 911 dispatcher continued talking the caller through escaping, Jane accidentally knocked over her captor's taser, waking him. The line went dead briefly, and she was suddenly minutes away from being the 6th victim of the serial killer Shawn Great. And by this point, the police knew they had to race if they wanted any chance of saving the helpless woman. Great sat up in his bed and stared at the floor, before laying back down again, not realizing that Jane was on the phone with the police.
Are you still there?
How much longer?
What?
How much longer?
Do you hear any officers outside?
No.
Okay, they're in the area. Can you get out of the house?
Locked.
It's locked. Are you at the door?
Yeah, I am.
She's at the door.
What?
She's at the door on the right side of the house. She got out of the bedroom. Is there a window there?
Yeah, I'm looking out and they tell me to come back.
She said,
Hurry, hurry.
she said to hurry up and come back.
Yeah, they can see me if they come
locked.
to it.
The door is locked.
Come on out, hurry up, get out here. Where is he?
Bedroom sleeping.
Still sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay, they have her.
He's not on it. Armed.
Unarmed?
Yeah.
Right now. Do it. Don't do it. No, if you can't be in there, here, cover yourself up. Tell me what happened. What happened?
Their rescue of the woman and arrest of Great was heard on the call. Thankfully, the woman survived this ordeal, though likely not without having some lasting scarring effects on her. As a teenager growing up in Marion, Ohio, Shawn Great was well liked, particularly by girls. He had a charm about him that would mask his inner rage, at least for a while. When he was 18, he was arrested for grabbing his then-girlfriend by the throat. A few years later, he was arrested for breaking into his 17-year-old girlfriend's home and choking her, and only 8 months later, he broke into the same girl's house again, this time slipping underneath her couch and hiding until he saw an opportunity to strike. This time he had a butcher knife in hand. But Great's charm and artificial friendliness allowed him to go on and have 3 children with 3 different women, but his inner anger would never lay dormant for long. His ex-wife, Amber Nicole Bowman, claims that Shawn at one point said, "If I can't see my daughter, no one will." By his mid to late 20s, Great's behavior became more erratic. He would begin dating Christina Hildreth. The pair were happy and content in the beginning, but Great couldn't hide his true colors for long. Not only did he become violent, controlling, and jealous, he would also show signs of being cold and indifferent towards his confused girlfriend, and would eventually end up physically abusing her.
So was he violent with you?
Yes.
In what way?
He broke my hand, blacked my eye, strangled me, tied me up.
But his hostility would soon extend beyond just romantic partners and even to friends when he asked his friend for a loan, which was declined, and in response, he sent his friend a disturbing text saying, "Meet the other me." Eventually, Great would find himself living in Mansfield, hopping from woman to woman, and around this time, he met his first 2 victims, Rebecca Lisi and Candace Cunningham. Rebecca was a sex worker, and her body was found in March 2015. Her death was ruled an overdose originally, but Great later pleaded guilty to her murder. Candace Cunningham lived with Great in Mansfield before her disappearance in 2015. Police couldn't find her until the day of Great's arrest, when he led police to her body, which was lying behind a burned-down house in Richland County on the day of his arrest. Great managed to somehow become even more barbaric towards his next and final victim, Jane, who you heard in the phone call just before. Jane met Shawn Great around her apartment complex, and he eventually gained her trust. That was when he exposed her to his true self. He trapped her in an abandoned house and forced her to endure days of torture and other unspeakable things while she was tied up. Great barely slept on the first night of his victim's capture, giving her no chance of escape. However, after another day of torture, Great eventually passed out. His phone was right next to him going off, but he was seemingly in a very deep sleep. So Jane took this opportunity as her likely last chance to escape alive, and she reached over his sleeping body as stealthily as she could to pick up the phone and dialed 911 while still partially bound. And that was the start of the 911 call. When police arrived at the property, they were met with more bodies than they'd expected. Great had been mercilessly killing the women who were unfortunate enough to trust him, and some of them were decomposing in the house he was squatting in. The 911 operator received a lot of hate and ridicule over her loud voice and constant seemingly unnecessary questions during the call, as many people believe she could have very easily led to Great being awoken, either by the sound of her voice or because of all the questions she was making Jane answer. Thankfully, things went the way they did, and this 911 call was a very fortunate story, as it got a monster off the streets who no doubt wouldn't have stopped doing what he was doing. The call you're about to hear was made by millionaire James Bob Ward, reporting that he had just shot his wife. His tone throughout the call is very monotone, calm, and nonchalant considering the matter for which he's making the call. The real estate mogul claims he walked into his and his wife's room to turn in for the night and was shocked to find his allegedly depressed and intoxicated 51-year-old wife, Diane, holding his Magnum handgun. Bob says the weapon accidentally discharged while he was struggling to get it away from her before she could kill herself or him, or the both of them. This was the call.
Yeah, what's the emergency?
I just shot my wife.
You just what?
I just shot my wife.
Where's your wife?
She's right here on the floor. Please send somebody at 5277 Iowa Country Club Drive.
Okay, what's going on there?
I just shot my wife.
You just shot your wife?
I shot my wife, yes, please send somebody over.
Stay on that with me. Let me add the fire department. Don't hang up.
I will.
Where's the weapon at, sir?
Orange County Fire Rescue. The address of your emergency?
44.
5277 Iowa Country Club Drive.
On there.
I just shot my wife.
Okay, where's the weapon?
It's in the,
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Where, is she breathing?
No, she's dead.
You know that for sure.
I think so, yes.
Okay, sir, where is the weapon?
It's in the nightstand next to the bed in the master bedroom, and I'll be glad to meet the officers at the front door.
Where is your wife, sir?
She's in the floor in the master bedroom.
How old is she?
Born in 1954.
Okay, you're sure she's not breathing, or?
She's dead. She's done. I'm sorry.
Sir, did you purposely do this?
No.
Or was it an accident?
It was an accident.
How long ago did this happen, sir?
Probably 5 minutes ago. I'm on the front steps.
You're out on the front steps?
Yeah, I'm on the front steps.
Okay.
And leaving the front gate from the front steps, we'll go upstairs and we'll find Diane. Yeah, they're there, but it's passing. You told me back up.
Did you see the deputy?
Yeah, I see lights, but they're somewhere back up. Have them back up. Hey guys, over here. Over here. Guys, over here. Hey, you're on the phone. I'll make the phone stop. No, I got him on the phone. We're good.
We can hang up. We're with him. Okay.
Bob was charged with second-degree murder of Diane. He has always claimed the gun went off when he was trying to get it away from Diane, but prosecutors believe the two were arguing over financial problems, and that's why Bob shot her. Now it was up to a jury to decide, but to this day the question is, was Diane Ward's death really just a tragic accident, or did her husband Bob murder her in cold blood? Well, not too long ago, a significant discovery of a letter from the grave may finally answer the question that's confounded the justice system and haunted the Ward family since the day Diane died. Bob and Diane had it all, a happy 26-year-old marriage, 2 daughters, and enough money to own numerous luxurious estates in several states. Daughters Sarah and Mallory say they and their parents were a loving, tight-knit family. But eventually, Bob's real estate empire collapsed under the weight of the Great Recession, and even though Bob was facing bankruptcy, his daughters claimed he remained optimistic, but not Diane, who grew increasingly low-spirited over the prospect of losing the family fortune. Sarah said her mother vainly tried to ease her depression with booze and prescription drugs, and that she would turn into a different person far from the loving mom she knew, and completely out of control even in public. She said her mother was also directing all her anger and resentment at her father, after having to cut back on some of the luxuries the family grew used to, and Sarah says her father was like her mother's punching bag. Bob's defense attorneys painted Diane as a suicidal and unstable person, and in 2018, his defense attorneys produced new evidence. A suicide note written by Diane was found in the couple's Atlanta home. It was reportedly found by an estate sales professional in the closet in the master bedroom. She stated that she was on a ladder in a small closet in the bedroom when she noticed a pink notebook next to some hair rollers. She opened the notebook and found a note and some cards with Diane Ward printed on them. The alleged suicide note read, "Dear Mallory and Sarah, please know how much I love you. I don't know how it happened for me to end up like this. I want you to have wonderful lives and know that I will always be watching out for both of you. Take care of Daddy. I love you more than you will ever know. Take care of the dogs, they will need you." Defense attorneys claim that a former FBI handwriting expert could testify that he thinks the handwriting is indeed that of Diane Ward. So this all begs the question, is what Bob says true? Was his shooting of his wife an accident? But if this were the case, Bob's calm and seemingly unaffected tone over the phone with 911, and even during his police interrogation, wouldn't make much sense.
Then you're doing it rather than...
Any reading glasses anybody has?
Sure. Thank
you so much. Thank you.
I have my pair.
Thank you.
I may have...
I have a folding pair, but I think they took them. Thank you.
Oh.
Well, like I said, I'm Detective Frost. I didn't get your name, your first name.
I go by Bob.
Okay.
But it's James Robert.
It would be a safe assumption that anyone who just accidentally murdered their wife would show any kind of remorse or regret, but Bob was calm and seemingly unaffected throughout. He's still in prison today. This last one has been circulating the internet for decades, and you've likely heard it before. In fact, I've included it in a video I privated many years ago. I'm sure some of you remember. But new information has arisen on this call recently.
This is Ruth Price of 3877. What's the problem, ma'am? Oh, there's some guy been taking the place out. Oh. Well, he went in the back. I have an apartment in the back, and he said he was looking for a guy. And he comes to my door, and said he's looking for an apartment. So I live alone, and I'm an old lady. Mm-hmm. Where is he now, ma'am? I don't have no idea.
For the longest time, this phone call was commonly just referred to as things like old woman murdered during 911 call. For a long time, people speculated that this call is just a hoax or a choreographed recording for 911 operator training. Eventually, though, the woman's name was revealed to be Ruth Price, and it was learned that the call was in fact real. However, the internet was still having a hard time gathering any further information on this Ruth Price woman, or what her fate was after the phone call. The unfortunate assumption that she was murdered shortly after this call was always the go-to assumption. At the beginning of the call, Ruth begins to give her address as 3877, but is cut off by the 911 operator. During this 911 call, Ruth presents herself as an elderly woman who's concerned about a man who knocks on her door saying he's looking for an apartment. Ruth pauses after giving this information. Then you hear a blood-curdling scream, and Ruth says something about not being able to breathe. Recently, though, information as to who this Ruth Price woman was finally surfaced. Ruth Mildred Starr was born in Pueblo, Colorado on December 7th, 1913. Ruth went to Central High School in Pueblo, Colorado, and this was her yearbook photo. Ruth's obituary was recently found, which shows that she died in 1994 in the San Diego Union Tribune. Ruth was also mentioned in a newspaper section called Assaults on November 3rd, 1980 in the San Diego Evening Tribune. In this newspaper clipping, it says Ruth M. Price was assaulted on the 3800 block of 35th Street.
This is Ruth Price of 3877.
This newspaper clipping which you see here fits the Ruth Price 911 call perfectly. It wasn't a hoax, and it wasn't a 911 training call. That blood-curdling scream was unfortunately very real. But fortunately, even in Ruth's old age, she managed to fight off her attacker and live for another 14 years. What seems like a realistic possibility now is that this call was used to shock trainees for 911 call taking because of how blood-curdling and disturbing her panicked screaming was. And thus was born the legend of an old woman brutally murdered while on the phone with 911. At least this story had a much happier ending than originally thought. Years ago, I did a somewhat lighthearted video about the creepiest children's drawings. I made jokes about a lot of them, but a few on that list did seem like they might have had some sinister backstories. Over the years, I've gotten a handful of kids' drawings with backstories emailed to me. Today, I'm going to be compiling a few of those into this video. This was the drawing made by a 6-year-old boy in 2012. The picture was found in his room by his older sister Tracy, who sent this to me, who was 14 at the time, and she showed it to her parents. In the picture is the family around the dinner table, drawn in a typical 6-year-old skill level. The reason Tracy showed it to her family is because she could recognize all the family members at the dinner table, even the family dog and cat. Who she couldn't recognize was the man sitting on the floor kind of behind the table. Tracy said in her emails to me that when she was asking her little brother who that man was, he kept shrugging his shoulders and saying he's not allowed to tell. The man was drawn to be dressed in all black and has reddish-brown curly hair, as you can see. Because of her little brother's refusal to explain who that fifth person in the picture was, she showed it to her parents, explaining that he likely had an imaginary friend or was pretending to be seeing ghosts. After the parents confronted the child at dinner asking who the man in the picture was, the boy made a pouty face and shrugged his shoulders. He did this anytime they asked, with the most detailed answer from his mouth being, "I'm not allowed to tell." The parents, specifically the dad, weren't fazed by it, as really a 6-year-old could draw anything and create some kind of crazy story in their head behind it. Tracy would be responsible for watching her brother often when their parents weren't home. And one day when she was left in charge of watching him, she heard her brother talking to someone in his room. Upon getting to his room, she learned he was just playing with his toy car set on the floor, talking to most likely himself as he played. Tracy asked if he was talking to anyone. He looked at her and shrugged his shoulders again, pouting his face. Tracy then noticed some candies on the floor of her brother's room, a specific kind of green apple flavored candy that she'd never seen her mother buy before. She asked him where he got this, and he ignored her, going back to playing. Tracy took the candies and that angered her brother, yelling, "Give them back." She waited until her parents returned home to ask if either of them had bought the unusual candy. Since the boy was only 6 and it was summer break, aka receiving the candies at school wasn't even a possibility, the random candies appearing in the boy's room became a concern. Even as the boy was scolded and pressed by his parents as to where he got the candies from, he still just made his pouty, angry face and ignored them. The boy was grounded by his father until he would answer the question, so he wasn't allowed to leave his room. The family checked the closets in his room, under the bed, even the closets outside of the room. The idea that someone was inside of the house was out the window. On that same night that he was grounded, Tracy sat close to her bedroom door instead of on her bed, so that she would easily hear if and when her brother in the next room would start talking. And sure enough, when he did, which to note was way past her brother's bedtime, she jumped up and ran to his room, opened the door, and saw her little 6-year-old brother standing at his open window talking to a man who looked as though he were about to climb into the room. Tracy screamed for her mom and dad, causing the man at the window to flee, and her brother began to cry. Once Tracy told her parents that a man was talking to her brother through his window, the police were called. The boy still refused to talk at first, but with the police there, he eventually said that his friend told him not to tell anyone about him, or that he couldn't come and play anymore. When asked his friend's name and age, he said he didn't know. When asked what the two of them would do, the boy said he would come with snacks and candies for him and just play with toys. When asked how they met, he said they met in front of the house one day when the man stopped on his bike and gave him some candy. After offering to come back with more candies and snacks, Tracy's brother told him which bedroom window was his, and that's when this started. Submitted to me all the way back in 2015, This was sent by a mother of 2 children, a 6-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. Almost every night between the hours of 12 and 5 a.m., the boy would come to the parents' bedroom crying that he's scared because someone or something was in his room at the edge of his bed. The boy would claim that every night the person or thing would come out from his closet and move to the same spot at the foot of his bed and just stand there not moving. The first few times the parents would check the boy's bedroom just to make him feel better. The closet door would always be opened. When questioned why the closet door was always open when it was supposed to be shut, he would claim that it was because he was telling the truth about the thing in his closet. Every time the parents would show their son that the closet was empty, he would go back to sleep. Their 8-year-old daughter never had any similar issues to this. For a few nights, the parents would let him start sleeping in their room on the floor with a blanket. Eventually though, after this had been going on for too long, the parents decided to humor him one more time and asked him to draw what the thing at the foot of his bed looked like. His drawing sent chills down his parents' spines. In the drawing was some grudge-like figure that seems like it would be enough to give a grown man nightmares, let alone a 6-year-old boy. There also appears to be something at the window, and when questioned about this, the boy said that he sees it at the window sometimes too when it's not at the foot of his bed. The parents' solution to this was moving their son's bed to the spare bedroom across the hall that didn't have any big closets. The mom who submitted this couldn't help but get a little creeped out herself at the drawing, and every time he would come crying to their room in the middle of the night. This third and last one is a little different in that it's a mix of drawings and writing, and there's 3 different pages of it. This was found by the new babysitter of an 11-year-old boy named Rocco in Ottawa, Canada. The babysitter, who I'll refer to as Alyssa, was needed while the parents of Rocco were away for a week. According to Alyssa, Rocco was very quiet and kept to himself most of the time. He would stay in his room for a majority of the day, and would only come out to get food from the fridge or to go downstairs to play video games. Alyssa tried to befriend the child the first day, but eventually gave up after realizing Rocco either didn't like her or was just a very unfriendly, creepy kid in general. Alyssa would spend the majority of her shifts doing schoolwork and watching movies. She knew Rocco had an obsession with guns because of the amount of toy guns he had. They would lay across the house in varying rooms, ranging from Nerf guns to airsoft guns to varying types of toy guns. Alyssa had never been in Rocco's room yet though, but one night when Alyssa was having trouble sleeping, she heard Rocco sneak into her designated bedroom and was just standing by the doorway. She sat up in her bed and asked Rocco if something wrong. Then she just closed the door quickly and she heard him running back to his room. The next day, Alyssa went into Rocco's room for the first time. Rocco wasn't in there and the light was off. This meant he was in the basement playing video games, as those were the only 2 rooms he'd ever be in according to Alyssa. He didn't even seem to seek hanging out with friends. Sprawled out on Rocco's floor were a bunch of papers. The first piece of paper that caught her attention was this drawing of a handgun. It wasn't anything really alarming, it just further demonstrated his fixation on guns. Alyssa dug through the papers though, and found 4 pieces of paper stapled together with 3 different staples. They formed what could best be described as a little storybook. The first page looked to be the cover page, titled The Babysitter. Immediately Alyssa assumed this little book was about her. But not wanting to get caught reading it, she took pictures of each page of the little booklet, as well as a picture of the handgun drawing, and left the room to go read it on her phone elsewhere. These were the pictures she had taken. This was the second page. Rocco wrote on it, "It was a regular day in the house, when Mom and Dad brought over the babysitter for the first time. There's something about her that I hate. I think it's how ugly she is. She's a huge nerd, I don't want her in the house. Not sure why my mom and dad hired her. I think I'm gonna have to kill her." The drawing on the page is what's supposed to be Alyssa sitting on the couch on her phone, and Rocco spying on her through the doorway. This was the next page. It's day 3 and she's still here. Parents think I'm a baby or something that needs an annoying, ugly babysitter that eats all our food and drinks. In this drawing, Rocco appears to be grabbing a kitchen knife while Alyssa's in the fridge. The child's disdain for his babysitter becomes increasingly apparent in a disturbing manner. But the next and last page is by far the worst. It says, "She caught me sneaking into her room. I have to be quieter next time." The picture is quite obviously Rocco holding a knife behind his back while Alyssa lay asleep in her bed. The implications of this picture are beyond transparent. Alyssa returned to Rocco's room while he was still in the basement, and lo and behold found a small kitchen knife on his bedside nightstand. Alyssa sent the pictures of the drawings and knife to Rocco's parents and then called them. At first, the parents tried to convince her he must be joking around, but they were apparently easily convinced that Rocco could have monstrous intentions. They had Rocco's grandmother take over that same day. Alyssa left the house never informing the police or any other authorities. She accepted her payment for the 2 weeks that night, and she accepted the parents' apologies, but not without recommending that they take their son to get some serious help.